The warrior turns to Abel and says that he feels bad asking the boy to leave the team. Abel doesn't understand why his team made such a sudden decision. The warrior says that the demon of disaster is gone, so they don't need many warriors on the team to defeat the remaining demons. The warrior interrupts him and says that their team does not need the amber eyes in a world that is now in harmony. He asks if Abel understands this. Abel hangs his head and accepts the decision as he himself knew it very well. The boy thought about how over 99% of demons, the enemies of humans, have amber eyes that shine like gold. Abel understands that when peace is restored to the world, mages with amber eyes like his will be persecuted. The warrior approaches the guy and says that he has already prepared a mansion for Abel. Abel interrupts the warrior, whose name was Roy, and turns around, saying that he will never see him again. Abel turns and leaves. Roy calls after him and apologizes. He tries to convince Abel that he did not mean anything bad. Abel can't see anything. His whole body hurts. He feels like he's been sleeping for too long. The guy puts his hand forward and breaks the wooden barrier. Abel breaks the lid of the coffin and gets up. He thinks that if everything went well, he should have regained consciousness after 200 years. Abel looks at his hands and is amazed. He realizes that he has managed to complete a spell that probably no one else could have created, Reincarnation. The boy regained consciousness in a world where the demons had been defeated. 200 years had passed since then. Abel thought that if this was a world where civilization had matured and knowledge had grown, where things previously impossible even with magic had become possible, then this world should accept beings with amber eyes. At that moment, Abel heard a voice that told him that his eyes showed his true strength. Abel bent down, trying to find the mirror, but the mirror was gone. He assumed that it was broken. Abel had to spend a lot of time to conduct many experiments with the materials that make up the human body to create the perfect body. Abel could have changed his appearance a little, but he still felt attached to his previous aspects, so he decided not to change his appearance. Abel is confident that no one will recognize him in the new world, so it doesn't matter. Suddenly, Abel heard a sound and turned around to check what it was. He was wary. Abel thought it sounded like a woman. He was absolutely sure it was a person. Abel admires the fact that he was able to see a woman. Other people would not have such an easy time of it. Abel didn't know what he could do in the body of a child. He hid behind a corner and decided that he would try to attack her first. A long-haired girl enters the room. He presses his hand to his chest and addresses Abel. The girl seems beautiful to Abel. The girl drops the basket she was holding and starts crying. She says that she has been waiting for this day for a long time. The guy wonders who the girl is. The girl apologizes to the guy. She wipes her tears and says that she has been waiting for him for a long time. Abel comes closer. He wonders why she waited for him. He does not remember such a beautiful girl. The guy was immersed in his magical studies, which throughout his life had nothing to do with women. Then the guy looks closely at the girl's facial features and remembers one girl who looks very similar to her. He remembers. He will remember Roy yelling at him, asking if the boy had gone crazy. He pointed at the girl hiding behind Abel. He convinced the boy that she was an enemy of humanity. After conquering the demon territory, Abel saved the child. She wanted to deal with her only because she was the daughter of demons. Abel didn't understand why he felt sorry for the girl. He supposed that he felt sorry for her either because she was young or because of her amber eyes, which were very similar to his own. Then the boy turns his head away and decides that he saved the girl only on a whim and nothing more. The boy extends his hand to the girl, thinking that in any case, he knew her name. He says they haven't seen each other for a long time and calls her by her name, Lilith. The girl smiles and says she is glad to see Abel. She claims that the guy hasn't changed. Then she blushes, giggles, and says that she feels like the guy has gotten a little younger in 200 years. Lilith rises from the ground and says that ever since Abel saved her 200 years ago, she has wanted to repay him for his kindness. She tells him that she has been searching for the place they are in now for 200 years. The guy understands everything. Abel turns to Lilith and asks her to tell him what color her eyes are. At the moment, the girl's eyes were blue, but Abel remembers that they were amber. Abel understood that it would be more correct to say that eye color is the color of the soul, which is the most important component of human life. Abel remembered that even after reincarnation, a person cannot get rid of his eye color. Lilith says that she does have amber eyes. Then she says that she just wears blue contacts. She takes the contact lens off and shows it to the guy. Abel is amazed. The girl says that the most important thing is to get used to the lenses. The guy is surprised that the lenses can change the color of a person's eyes. Abel cannot believe that someone could come up with something so interesting. There was nothing like that in his time. The boy chuckles as he realizes that he was right to decide to be reborn after 200 years. He admired the evolution of man. The boy, studying the history of mankind, saw countless examples of discrimination and persecution because of eye color. Abel recalls that many lives were sacrificed only because of differences in eye color. Abel thinks it's very ironic, since a small piece of the lens was able to solve their problem. Lilith turns to Abel and says that they have something to talk about. She asks if the guy wants to go outside first. Lilith says that her house is nearby. The guy agrees. Abel was interested in Lilith's story, as well as all the new creations of the modern world. While he was thinking about all this, Lilith prepared a scarf and threw it around the guy's neck. Abel turned and said that the thing on his neck looked like a shawl. Lilith clarified, saying that it was a scarf used to protect the body from the cold. He recalls that the name was slightly different 200 years ago. Lilith extends her hand to Abel and says that it is time for them to move forward. Abel does not consider himself a child, but still extends his hand to the girl. Together they go outside and the guy sees that everything is in snow. The girl let him through the snowdrifts. Abel blushed as he realized that he had taken his first steps on the white snow in a new world. Thus began his new story. The girl was still leading Abel by the hand. The guy saw houses and asked if it was a village. The girl turns to the guy and says that they are there. The guy looks at the girl in bewilderment. They approach the two houses together. The boy says that the house on the right looks simple compared to the mansion on the left. The girl thinks that the simpler house would suit Abel better. Lilith comes to the door and says that a simpler house would be suitable for a person in Abel's position to avoid unnecessary attention. The boy agrees with the girl. In the body of a child, he cannot use even 3/10 of his former strength, so he decides to calmly wait until he grows up. Lilith turns on the light in the house. The guy notices the light and pays attention because he did not feel that the girl used magic. Then the boy looks up and notices the lamps. He asks what they are. Lilith explains that their house is lit by bulbs. Lilith points to the switch and explains that with one push of the button, the bulbs light up the entire room. She demonstrates this and asks if it is really genius. Abel suggested that the bulbs had a magical stone inside, so when a person presses the switch, the light turns on. Lilith thinks that the guy is not very surprised by the new inventions of modern times. Abel says that it is indeed a wonderful invention, but he still finds it more convenient to use his power. The guy stretches his hand forward and uses his magical powers. Lilith laughs and says that it sounds a lot like him. The guy looked at the girl and thought that a lot had changed over the past time. Abel sat down on the couch and began to think about using luminescent magic to create light. It was the simplest and most basic magic that could be learned. Abel was not shocked, as anyone could use this magic, regardless of eye color. Abel raised his head and wondered why, with such magical capabilities, people spend so much effort on creating unnecessary equipment. He wondered why no one thought about it. Lilith approaches Abel, who is lying down on the couch, and covers him with a blanket. The guy still does not fully understand the world he found himself in. A few hours later, Lilith set the table and called Abel to eat. After dinner, he went to the library to study the history and structure of the new world. It was already light outside as the boy had been sitting in the library all night. He was very much amazed. Abel read that the levels of magic in the New World had decreased over 200 years. It seemed incredible to him. He understood that the world had experienced an unnoticed decline. A guy was reading one of the books and complaining that it presented the wrong magical syntax for explanations. He wondered if the author of the book used syntax. He understood that the books were handwritten and rewritten in many copies 200 years ago, so the content and quality of the books have changed and improved after many restorations. Abel took into account that although culture has evolved greatly, there are still shortcomings. The boy went down to the dining room to eat. When he sat down at the table, Lilith asked him why the boy decided to reincarnate in a child's body. She says that it only hinders the boy. Abel closes his eyes and says that although a child's body has many risks, it also has some benefits. Abel explained that in the New World there are 3 peaks to reach. The academic peak occurs in adolescence, the physical peak in the 20s, and the magical peak in the 30s. Abel returned to the library. He stretched and yawned, thinking that he still had a lot to learn about the world. Moreover, as a child he wanted to start a new life in another world. The guy leaves the room. Abel notices a tray with a note below. He picks it up and reads it. Lilith cooked breakfast and lunch for the guy. She had to go to work, so she wrote that she would be back only in the evening. She asked the guy to rest and make himself at home. Abel assumes that the girl did not want to distract the guy, since he was immersed in books. Abel reaches down and takes the towel off the tray. He takes the sandwich and eats it, thinking about Lilith's work. He was glad that the girl had means of support. He wondered what the girl was doing in a village full of people. Abel yawned. He realized that he wanted to sleep, but he decided that he would not stop reading until he found a good place to stop. Suddenly, someone came to the door and knocked on it. Abel looked at the door. He stood up and walked towards her. He was wary because there was someone else in the house besides Lilith. Abel opens the door and a boy runs into the room, greeting the guy. He pointed at Abel and decided that he was Lilith's younger brother. Abel looked at the boy in bewilderment. He assumed that the unexpected guest was Lilith's acquaintance. Judging by the boy's appearance, Abel can tell that he is from a rich family. The guy assumes that the boy is the son of the owner of the mansion that stands near their house. The boy smiled at this time and said that Abel should be happy because he will become Ted's younger brother. Abel turns around and continues reading his book. He says it's a waste of time. He thinks there will always be spoiled children in the world. Ted comes up to Abel and starts shouting to get his attention. He asks Abel to be his little brother. He asks if Abel understands what that means. Abel looks up, turns his gaze to the boy and apologizes. He says that he is not interested in the relationship between a graduate student and a student. The boy began to swear and then continued asking him to become his younger brother. Abel closes the book. He doesn't like to scare people, but at the moment he had no choice. Abel tries to give the boy advice. The guy stands up and says that the boy needs to stop messing with him. He shows his amber eye and asks if the boy understands now. The boy can't say a word. He begins to tremble and look stunned. He recoils from Abel. Abel thinks that his amber eyes worked. He decided to take advantage of the fact that amber eyes symbolized evil in the world. He hoped that the boy would not want to have any connection with him. Abel decides to scare the boy a little more. He says that he will not hide anymore. At this time, the boy begins to chuckle. Abel looked at the boy in bewilderment because he did not understand why he had such a reaction. The boy points at Abel and asks if he really has amber eyes. He falls to the floor and starts laughing. He says that it is the first time he has seen such eyes. Abel does not understand what is happening. Ted was lying on the floor, laughing and pointing at Abel. He was asking if the boy really had amber eyes. Abel looked at Ted in confusion and wondered why things had turned out this way. Then Abel heard someone's footsteps and realized that someone was coming. Another boy came into the room. He greeted Ted. The boy began to come closer to Ted and remind him that he should not come to Lilith's house without an invitation. Abel assumes that the boy who entered and Ted are brothers, despite the fact that they have different colored eyes. Ted calls the boy who entered Bass and, pointing his hand at Abel, asks him to look at him. Abel wondered what was going on. He felt like he wasted his time arguing with Ted. He felt like this was all a joke. Abel decided that he should pay attention to a guy named Bass. He notices that Bass is about 2 years older than Ted. Abel thinks that even if Bass hates Ted, he still has to keep an eye on Abel. Bass doesn't particularly react to Abel's amber eyes. He heard that Lilith's talented younger brother would come and stay at her house. Abel blushes at the word talented. Bass adjusts the collar of his shirt and says that, apparently, his expectations were too high. Abel simply remains silent and looks at Bass. Abel couldn't believe that Ted's older brother was so unpleasant. He remembers that his brother had said almost the same thing. At that time, Ted was running around the room, pretending to be a chicken, and Bass was watching him thoughtfully, thinking about Lilith's words about his brother. Bass says the only thing he knows for sure is that amber eyes are seen as a symbol of evil. Abel's eyes widened in surprise. He thought that couldn't be true. He thought Bass said it too calmly. Abel turns to his brothers and asks if this means that in the world, amber eyes are considered useless. The brothers look at each other in confusion. Ted starts laughing loudly because Abel didn't know about this. Abel was unhappy that he no longer had a chance to correct his own name. Abel first tried to understand what was going on. Ted laughs and tries to explain why he laughs with his chicken-colored eyes. Ted points his hand at Abel and says that his eyes don't correspond to any of the elements, not fire, not water, not wind. He says that his eyes can't even heal. He says that Abel has normal eyes. Bass approaches the guy and asks him to stop talking like that. Ted goes silent for a while. Abel is surprised. Abel remembered that if a person with amber eyes did not go through 10 years of training, all elements would be blocked. Abel knew that a mage with amber eyes may not be different from an ordinary person at the beginning, but soon he will be able to use magic of all elements. Abel assumed that this was the reason why people viewed amber eyes as a threat to humanity. Bass addresses Abel as Abeshi. He asks if he called him correctly. The boy says his name is Abel. He thinks that it doesn't sound much better. Base apologizes. Base bows and apologizes to Abel for his brother's disrespect. Abel is thinking that he was wrong. He says that it's no big deal. Base turns to Ted and says that he should apologize. Ted says that he won't do that and repeats that the guy has chicken eyes. Base comes closer to Ted and asks him not to be like that. He says that Abel, even without magic, can live peacefully in this place. Abel looks at Bass dumbfounded and wonders what this means. Base holds up his index finger and reminds them that Abel is their age. He hopes that Abel will get along with Ted. Abel hopes that Base doesn't think he's just a regular person with amber eyes. These were the kind of people Abel hated the most. Base heads out and smirks. He tells Ted that they should go do magic. Ted yells at Abel that they'll see each other later. Abel looked at his brothers in bewilderment. He tried to understand what was wrong with them. He did not understand their behavior since they broke into someone else's house and began to speak badly about the owner. Abel thinks it's a bit strange, although now he understands why they weren't afraid of him. The boy approaches the book that contains the history of the war and opens it to read. The guy reads that there has been no war between humans and demons for the last 100 years. He thinks that peace has lasted for quite a long time. Abel wondered why no one was afraid of the evil demonic eyes anymore. It seemed strange to him. The boy also learned that with some practice, people with red, blue, green, gray, or black eyes can easily use their elements to create magic. On the other hand, people with amber eyes need to spend a lot of time practicing to create magic. The boy understands why the level of mages in the world has decreased, and amber eyes are considered useless. The boy leans back in his chair. Abel doesn't like things like contact lenses. He begins to understand why Lilith used them. Abel thought that there was nothing he could do about it. He smirked and decided that living a simple life wasn't that simple. When Abel was sitting on the couch, Lilith came into the house and informed him that she had returned from work. Abel saw the girl's suit and assumed that she worked as a maid. Lilith smiled and confirmed his guess. Lilith explained to the guy that in the new world there is a job called maid. She turned around and asked the guy what he thought of her outfit. Abel blushes, looks back at the book and says that the outfit suits the girl. Lilith says she'll go and cook them dinner. The guy asks the girl to stop. Lilith asks what Abel wanted to say. Abel said that he now understood why the girl had to hide the color of her eyes. The girl became a little sad. Abel assumed that Lilith simply did not want others to know that she was a demon. Lilith says that after 200 years there are no more demons left. At least, that's what she thought. Lilith remembers that Abel was the leader of the heroes with the mission to defeat the Demon King. She says that after defeating the Demon King, the humans began to get rid of the remnants of the demons, so when the humans won, all the demons disappeared. Lilith tells how, when the world became calm, the power of the magicians became weaker and weaker. The girl wanted to finish the story, but Abel interrupted her and suggested that in the end, the fear of amber eyes disappeared. Now people had no goal to become stronger. He asked if she had said everything correctly. The girl said that Abel has not changed in those 200 years. She confirms that the guy is right. Abel looks up at the girl and asks if she hates humans. He then says that's not the way it's phrased and asks if she hates the heroes who defeated the Demon King. Lilith just smiles. Abel remembers when his team declared an end to the demons. That day, the Demon King and Abel fought. Abel did not forget that the Demon King had a daughter. Lilith says that it is true. She talks about how at times she felt despair that made her want to scream. Then she says that Abel risked his life to save her. She remembers how the guy even found her a safe place. She asks if the guy remembers it. Abel remembers it. He says he only found a safe place for a few weeks. The girl remembers that Abel even taught her how to use magic. He also taught her human rules, manners, and much more. Abel turns around and tells the girl not to try to change the subject. He remembers that the girl told him that every woman has her secrets. The boy looks at the girl and wonders what she has been through in all these 200 years. He remembers how small and sweet she was 200 years ago. Lilith smiles and says that a woman in a pub taught her that. She blushes and laughs. The girl then approaches Abel and gets his attention. She lowers herself to his eye level and says that she will always be grateful to him for what he has done for her. Lilith smiles. The guy asks if she's serious. He hides behind a book, looks away, and thanks the girl. The girl blushed and laughed. Abel used the book to hide from her gaze. Lilith walked up to the water and lowered herself completely into it. She and Abel were taking a bath together. The girl smiled and said that hot water was wonderful. Abel didn't want to take a bath together, but Lilith forced him to. However, the guy thinks that he is exaggerating when he says forced. Lilith smiles and apologizes. She justifies herself by saying that she could not contain her love for the master. Abel asks if it's true. He thinks the girl has a strange desire to grab another person and drag him into the bathroom when she can't contain her love. The girl chuckles. Abel looks away and says that this is all wrong. He asks if the girl knows how such situations usually end. Lilith wants to say something at first, but then she closes her mouth and smiles. She laughs and says that she became interested. She didn't think that Abel would say something like that. Lilith stands up and says that Abel doesn't sound convincing when he says that while in a child's body. She sits down next to the boy and he tuts. Abel understood that he was really in the body of a child and did not feel attraction to the opposite body. The guy looks at Lilith and notices that over 200 years, various parts of her body have grown. Abel remembers that when he was in his 30s in his past life, she was just a tiny child. It seemed to him that now their places had changed. Lilith puts her hands on Abel's shoulders and says that she is very happy. He hugs the guy and is happy that the master has finally begun to perceive her as a woman. The guy looked away. He pushed Lilith away. Abel said, no matter what the area, his principle is not to give in to self-denial. The girl blushes and says she knows. Night fell. Lilith was lying on the bed at that time. Abel was lying next to her. He stood up. Abel spent the night with Lilith. In his past life, Abel had no experience with women. At that time, he was interested in nothing but becoming stronger. The girl smiled and rolled over. The guy covered her with a blanket so she wouldn't catch a cold. He looked at Lilith and wondered if that meant being happy. Abel smiled as he felt that he would be able to sleep more peacefully that night. He lay back down and fell asleep. The next morning, Abel was sitting and reading books again. He was thinking about how several days had passed since he was reborn in a new world. Abel spent his days in comfort, without getting into any trouble. He had slept for 200 years, if not more, and he thought about the long work ahead of him to make up for lost time. Abel felt that an inevitable event was about to happen that day. He heard the footsteps of someone he did not want to see near him. Ted walked into his office. He opened the door abruptly and laughed. Then he raised his hand and told Abel that he had arrived. Abel was not happy, as this happened every day. He assumed that Ted needed a good friend his age to play with. Ted asked Abel to play with him. Abel closed the book, folded his fingers, and used body-strengthening magic, leg-strengthening. He didn't think he had to play with Ted. Abel moved to the window very quickly. Ted didn't have time to follow him, and when he noticed the guy near the window, it was already too late. He asked Abel to stop since they were on the second floor. Abel said he was sorry, and then jumped out of the window. The guy landed right on the roof of the neighboring house. Abel turned around and said that he didn't have time to worry about the child. Ted looked at the guy in shock. Ted came closer to the window and asked how Abel did it. Abel opened the book and started reading it. He understood that it was not ideal, but he had already gotten used to the child's body a little. The guy thought that this was only a part of his power, but it seemed to be enough to impress the child. Ted began to curse. He folded his arms and decided to try the spell that Abel had used. Ted jumped into the street, feeling the magic in his legs. Abel looked at him and thought that it was a good try. He thought that the boy could use the magic of the physical body. Abel thinks about how proper strengthening magic wraps the body like armor. He noticed that the boy was giving off too much magic. It seemed to him that Ted was wasting magic, so he still had a lot to learn. Suddenly, Ted feels the mania leave his legs. He loses his balance and falls down, screaming. Ted lands upside down in the bushes. Abel lands next to him, unimpressed by his legs sticking out. He expected something like this. Abel asks if Ted is okay. The boy rises from the bushes and curses. He asks how Abel did something like that with his chicken eyes. Ted decides to attack Abel. The guy jumps over him and opens the book again to read it. Ted is lying on the ground and screaming. Abel notices that the guy has a limited vocabulary. Abel turns around and decides to comfort Ted since he is a child. The guy tells him not to worry about something like that. Abel approaches the boy, bends down and says that he will be able to use this spell correctly if he practices magic for another 20 years. Ted looks at the guy with displeasure and then starts kicking the ground again. He shouts that Abel should be his subordinate. Abel does not remember having to carry out anyone's orders. Abel seems to understand. He approaches Ted and says that he can be his subordinate after all. Ted gets up from the ground and is happy that Abel has finally decided to become his subordinate. He asks the guy to accept his congratulations. Abel closes the book and says that there is one condition. He adjusts his scarf and says that he will become Ted's subordinate only if he can take the scarf away from him by sunset. Abel assumes that Ted will constantly interfere with his studies anyway. He decides to simply use him as a practicing partner. Abel wanted to find out how talented the wizards of the new era are, whether they can be worthy competitors to him. Ted shouts with joy. He points at Abel and says that this will be an easy win. He asks if he really just wants to take the scarf. Abel doesn't understand where the boy gets such confidence from. Abel begins the countdown. He finishes counting and takes off running to get away from Ted. The boy runs after him and shouts that he will catch up with him. Ted ran after Abel and tried to stop him. Abel was running away from him at that time, reading a book. Abel turns around and looks at the boy. He thinks Ted has finally realized how inept he is at using body enhancement magic. Abel notices that the boy has almost stopped using magic to chase him. Abel does not feel any magical talent in the boy, nor does he think that Ted is intellectually gifted. But the boy noticed that Ted was very resilient. Ted ran after him crying and asking how he could be so calm. Abel replied that the whole point was that his teaching method was different from Ted and Bass's. Abel remembers that 200 years ago no one could keep up with him, especially when he was serious. Abel remembers Roy and thinks that, at best, someone on the level of the Wind Hero could keep up with him. Abel turns around and notices Ted lying on the floor, breathing heavily. The guy turns completely to the boy and says that there is still time before sunset. He asks if the boy wants to give up. Ted stands up abruptly, trying to touch Abel with his hand, and shouts that he is caught up with the guy. Abel dodges and says that Ted is moving very slowly. Ted gets upset and puts his head on the floor. He says he can't keep up with Abel anymore. The guy thinks the boy has reached his limit. Ted wanted to say something, but he didn't have the strength. Abel thought that Ted would get tired in 5 minutes, but the boy ran after him for about 20 minutes. Abel assumes that the boy is doing physical training. Abel looks away from the boy and decides that it's time for them to finish. He then looks towards the window of the house and notices something strange. Abel sees Lilith and Bass talking about something. The guy uses body enhancement, magical auditory enhancement. The guy hears Lilith say that she cannot have a relationship with Bass. Abel heard what Bass and Lilith were talking about. He could understand Bass since he was a teenager. It seemed unsurprising to him that Lilith liked him. Bass blushed and lowered his head, then raised it sharply and asked what the girl didn't like about him. He demanded that she tell him. Lilith says she doesn't see any problem with the guy. She claims she loves someone else. Bass's eyes widen and asks if the girl is really talking about Abel. Lilith becomes more serious and says that it is true. She apologizes and says that she has no desire to have any relationship with Bass. She asks him to give up. Bass blushed even more. He pointed at the girl and asked if the girl really loved her own brother. He said it was disgusting. Bass leaves and says that they should be ashamed. The door slams, which means that Bass has left. Abel wanted to correct Bass, telling him that Lilith is not actually his sister. Lilith stood and looked at the door. She could understand Bass and she felt a little sorry for him. Abel decides to pretend that he didn't see anything. He tries to get down from the roof. Then he feels someone behind him. He guessed that Ted had already regained consciousness. Ted was going to hit the guy. Abel managed to dodge, so Ted missed again and fell down. Ted gets up and asks how Abel managed to avoid his attack. Abel opened a book to read. He thought Ted was not very smart. Ted suddenly becomes ill and collapses. Before he passes out, Ted says that this time he really has reached his limit. Abel looks at the boy and thinks that this was too much for the first day. He assumes that the boy should learn from this and stop coming to his and Lilith's house. But that's just his thought. A few days later, Abel was standing in front of Ted again. The boy called out to Abel and then jumped on him. Abel said that Ted was completely open. Ted got hit on the head with a book. The boy started cursing and grabbing his head. Abel says that Ted should stop announcing his actions. Ted smiles and says that he almost managed to grab Abel. The boy replies that this statement is completely false. Abel noticed that Ted liked their game. From then on, it became their daily game. Abel chuckled. He asked if the boy really called him by his name. Ted laughs in response and says that they have been playing this game for a few days now, so he remembered the guy's name. Ted puts his hands at his sides and says that he needed to remember Abel's name, since he will be his subordinate in the future. Abel does not resist. Abel has noticed that Ted has improved his abilities a little over the past few days. The guy doesn't know if this is good or bad. Abel is convinced that body-strengthening magic, which requires good natural instinct, is the best option for the boy. Ted waves his hand and shouts that he will take Abel's scarf. He rushes towards him again to attack. Abel puts his hand out and blocks Ted's punch. He then grabs the boy's arm and trips him. Abel believed that despite all their games, Ted was still very weak and inexperienced. That was why he always lost. Alva watched Ted roll off the roof and screamed. He told the boy he was too slow. He claimed that even a fly could stop his attack. Abel asks if Ted wants to give in. The boy stands up, then slips and falls. Abel doesn't have time to react. He falls down and curses because he sees the boy crying and pressing his right knee to himself because it hurt. Abel comes closer to the boy. He understands that the boy managed to land somehow, but he still got a bruise. Abel assumes that he only has a fracture. He knew that compared to internal organs, healing broken bones with magic is easier. Abel reached out his hand to the boy's knee. He is not very good at restoration magic, but he is confident that he can handle it. At that moment, Ted's brother runs up to him. He pushes Abel away and yells at his brother to hold on. He tells him that he is going to help him by using restoration magic. Bass placed his hands over Ted's knees and used restoration magic. Abel noticed that Bass used elementary restoration healing magic. Abel feels like he underestimated him, as Bass had green eyes that had a connection to the wind. He remembers that people with gray eyes use spells aimed at healing. Abel approaches Bass and asks what he is doing. Bass turns his gaze to the boy and asks if he has never seen restoration magic. He demands that the boy shut up and not disturb his concentration. Bass turns around to continue healing his brother. Abel just looks at him sympathetically, knowing that this is bad. Abel remembered that the magic of restoration was very delicate. He compared it to building blocks. He understood that it worked on the principle that you need to put the big blocks first, so that everything else does not collapse. But he noticed that Bass, using this analogy, was trying to put the big blocks on top of the small ones. Abel looks at Boss and thinks that if he does this, Ted will feel incredible pain. Ted starts screaming loudly. Bass asks if his brother is okay. He says the treatment may cause a little pain, but he just has to endure it. Ted says it hurts a lot. Abel turns to Bass and says that Ted has passed out. He convinces Bass that he has already given him first aid, so now he needs to take Ted to the doctor. Bass slowly turns to Abel and says that he saw what the guy did. He says Abel pushed Ted. Abel asks if Bass really means to say that he pushed Ted. He says that if Bass was watching them, then he should have seen what happened. Abel starts to explain what happened. At this point, Bass starts to get even angrier. He approaches Abel and demands that he call Ted master. Abel asks if Bass would really be angry about the situation. He thinks it's stupid. Bass says that Abel is a commoner and Ted is a nobleman. He convinces the guy that age doesn't matter. Ted is still the second son of the Lombard family. Abel says that status doesn't matter at this point. He looks at the crowd that is gathered and says that they need to get Ted to a safe place. Bass gets even more angry because Abel said that status doesn't matter. Bass starts cursing. He points his hand at the guy and says that he will make him regret his attitude towards the nobles. Bass takes out his sword and says that Abel has tarnished the honor of the nobility. He apologizes for not being lenient with a man like Abel. He points his sword at Abel and challenges him to a duel. Bass challenged Abel to a duel. The boy turned around and looked at the crowd that had gathered around them. He thought it was all a bit complicated. Abel raised his hand and asked Bass to wait a minute. He says he has no reason to fight him. Bass pointed at the boy and asked him not to make fun of him. He says the boy just made the nobleman look bad in front of the others. Abel feels like he's made Bass even angrier. He thinks about how he needs to treat Ted's wound as quickly as possible. He wonders if he should fight Bass and defeat him as quickly as possible. Abel closes his eyes and agrees to the duel. He always wanted to have a sample of the types of magic that the nobles of the current era could use in battle. Abel thinks that if he quickly ends the battle with Bass without using too much flashy magic, the crowd of people won't pay attention to him. Bass announces that whoever makes their opponent say, "I give up," first will win. Bass smirks and says that he will not fight Abel at full strength as he is older than him. Abel turns away and says that he understands. He asks Bass to quickly begin the battle. Bass gets even angrier. He asks how much longer the guy is going to mock him. He agrees to start a fight. Bass swings his hand. He shouts that Abel will regret daring to mock him. Bass uses the spell, Windblade. Abel dodges and the attack misses him. The guy is in the air. He notices that Bass's magic power itself is mediocre, but he notices that Bass's spell speed is too high. Abel looks at the boy and suggests that the speed somehow affects the speed of his magic. Bass smirks. He asks why Abel reacts to him so strangely. He turns his sword and asks if the boy really sees the artifact for the first time. Abel thinks about the artifacts. Bass points at him and mocks him. He says that the guy is not very smart. Bass smirks at how Abel lived so many years but never learned about the artifacts. He thinks that Abel lived in some small country. Bass winks and says he'll teach the boy. He picks up the sword and explains that it's a support item created with magic. He says that it's because of his sword that he can cast his spells so quickly. Base swings his sword and tries to attack Abel. The guy jumps and dodges. He uses body-strengthening magic, use of analytical eye. Abel analyzes Base's artifact. Abel wonders if the spell was really created in advance. He suggests that this mechanism, the artifact, works simply. The magician pours in his magical power, and it allows the magic recorded in it to be used. Base attacks Abel again, but this time at close range. The guy dodges and deflects the attack with his hand. He says that it is not that important. Base opens his mouth in surprise. He could not understand how the guy was able to deflect his attack with only his hands. Abel could understand a possible reason. He suggests that the appearance of the artifact is one of the factors that lowered the level of magicians. Abel thinks that this is quite convenient, as the artifact simplifies the life of the magician, helping him to create a spell faster. He thinks that this is the reason why everyone started using artifacts. Abel thinks that if a magician has an artifact, then he does not need to create a spell, since he will be able to use the spell that is written in the artifact. Abel remembers the world of 200 years ago. He remembers that such artifacts were unacceptable. Abel thinks that in a world where demons, the only enemies of humans, have disappeared, even instant simple magic will be enough to be popular. Abel is very upset because, as a result, the magic tool took away the thinking mind from the magicians. Abel asks if Bass really used magic. The nobleman looks at the boy in confusion. Abel looks at the boy with a detached expression and says that he only felt a slight breeze. Bass gets even angrier. He clicks his tongue. Bass then takes off and is about to attack Abel. He shouts many negative words at him. Abel decides to show Bass what real magic looks like in gratitude for his cooperation with his investigation. Abel rises up and uses the spell Windblade. Bass hears a whistle and feels a strong gust of wind. He looks at Abel in amazement. A gust of wind lifts him up. There is an explosion and Bass is thrown a huge distance. Abel approaches Bass. He used real magic to show the difference in their abilities, but he reduced the power of the spell significantly so as not to cause serious injury to Bass. Abel asks what Bass will do next. He wonders if the boy is going to give up. Bass looks at Abel angrily. He does not understand how this is possible. He says that Abel is just a child with the weakest eyes. He asks who Abel really is. At that moment, Lilith runs up to Bass and strikes him. The guy is thrown back a huge distance. Abel asks what the girl is doing. Lilith immediately becomes cheerful and starts talking about how she just threw out the trash that was lying nearby. Abel asks if Lilith really works as a maid in Bass's house. He asks if the girl will have any problems after that. Bass gets angry. He asks why Lilith is doing this to him. The girl becomes gloomy. She demands that Bass shut up and never speak to her again. She will not forgive him if he treats her master badly. Bass is frightened. Lilith turns to Abel and apologizes for being late. The guy says that everything is fine. He asks her to forgive Bass. Lilith turns around and says that Bass should thank Master Abel for his tolerance. This time, she decides to forgive Bass and his aggressive behavior. Bass rises from the ground and asks why he, as a nobleman, should be forgiven. He claims that it is the other way around. Bass tries to say something else, but falls silent. Bass feels that if he says anything more about Avli, Lilith will most likely not leave him alive. Bass bends over and begins to cry. An hour later, Ted was finally put on the bed and examined. The doctor knew that Ted's friends and brother wanted to go outside and play with him, but he still asked them to be patient. The doctor said that Ted would need about 6 months to recover. Ted was lying on the bed at that time. Abel looked at him through the window. It seemed to him that Ted would have to lie in bed for a long time. Abel did not think that the injury was that critical, even if the symptoms had worsened because of Bass. He realized that the level of medical skills among the mages had also dropped. Suddenly, Ted heard the creaking of the floorboards and turned to see where the noise was coming from. Ted saw Abel standing near the window. He was surprised by his appearance. Abel came up and asked him how he felt. Ted chuckles and says he doesn't have a serious wound there. He shows his leg. Abel notices that Ted has fallen asleep. He looks at the boy's face and thinks that the boy is not very smart. Abel is not going to wait 6 months. He spreads his arms out to the sides and uses the bone restoration technique, a type of healing magic restoration. The guy also used the body-strengthening healing power. Abel noticed the way Ted grimaced in his sleep. He stopped using magic, deciding that it would be enough. Abel knew that Ted's injuries had nothing to do with him, but he still hated losing his daily sparring partner. Abel needed Ted to heal his wounds as quickly as possible so that he could continue working hard for him. Abel jumps out of the window and apologizes to Ted. He had very little time. Base and his father come to Lilith and Abel's house. They were kneeling together. The father grabbed his son's head to force him down. He turned to Abel and said that he was sorry for what happened. The boy tried to understand what was going on. The man continued to apologize. Abel was not impressed that Base and his father Evans came to him to apologize. Base shouted, getting his father's attention. He asked why he should apologize to a man like Abel. The guy assumed that Bass was not going to apologize. Evans says that Abel is just the younger brother of their maid. He is very angry with his son. He curses and asks what his son just said. Evans decides to tell his father that they didn't actually hire Lilith. She hired them. Base sits there confused. Abel understands everything. At first, he was curious about why a high-class demon like Lilith would serve humans. He assumed that the Demon King's daughter had some plans for the Evans family. Abel understood that there were many obstacles for a demon who wanted to live with humans. The guy thinks that the girl most likely just wanted to use the power and authority of the nobles for her own benefit. Evans bows his head and his sons again. He begs the guy not to punish them too much. Abel at this point was only interested in what exactly Lilith had on them. Abel says that Evans and Bass can look up. He assures them that he is not angry with them at all. Evans looks happy. He bowed his head again and shouted that Abel was too generous. He expressed his great gratitude. Abel sighed from fatigue. He noticed that Evans' family never listened to other people. Evans tried to bow his son's head. Base resisted and cursed. He did not understand what was happening. That night, Base went into his father's office. Evans asked what his son wanted at such a late hour. Base asked if his father could kick Lilith and Abel off their land. The man says he can't do that. Base asks why. He starts to get angry. Evans had told him earlier that the land has many disadvantages in terms of geography, but it thrives because of Lilith. The man says that Lilith is their benefactor. He cannot ignore her opinion. Base asks what the man is talking about. He is trying to convince his father that even if they don't rely on her, they can manage their own land. He is confident that they can do it. Evans demanded that his son stop saying such things. Base asked why he shouldn't talk about it. Ted comes into the office. He yawns and asks what's going on. He says he heard voices in his room and thought something was wrong. Base asked if Ted could really walk. He recalls the doctor saying it would take 6 months for him to recover. Ted confirms that he can walk. He says that he can not only walk normally, but also run, but the most important thing for him is that he can play. Base turns to his father again and asks him to tell him why nobles should bow their heads to Lilith and revere her. He tries to find out who Lilith is. The man would like to tell his sons that Lilith is a demon who hides among people, but he couldn't say it at the moment. Base is very angry. He decides to turn to his father and ask him if he can recommend him to the Arsula Academy. Evans is surprised. He remembers that the Arsula Academy is a prestigious school where many elite mages are trained. He thinks that training there takes at least 5 years. Evans shakes his head and says he can't do that. He decides that Base will stay home and learn as the Lord's heir. He reminds him that Base promised to do that. Base turns to his father and says more confidently that he wants to learn strong magic. He wanted to become stronger than everyone else. Base says that he will be able to defeat all his enemies and no one will escape him. He assures his father that he will possess the most terrible magic. The man looks at his son in shock. Base continues and says that he will be the most powerful magician that no one can defeat. Ted goes to his brother and says that he should not think like that. Base pushes him away and tells him to shut up. Base is about to hit Ted, but his father stops him. Base screams that everything happened because of Ted. He puts the blame on him, as he befriended a commoner despite his nobility. Evans looks at his son and realizes that he cannot trust the title of Lord Bass to him when he is in such a state. Base pushes his father away from him. The man stands up straight and says he will recommend the boy to the Arsula Academy of Magic after all. Evans says he would like Bass to gain experience outside their country so he can see the world as it really is. Base smiles and says he knew his father would tell him this. Evans watches him go, wondering how he could have gotten his parenting so wrong. Ted wonders if his brother will be okay. Evans noticed that Ted kept his calm despite his older brother's indignation. He felt like he didn't know his sons at all. Evans felt like the mischievous and young Ted was more mentally mature than his older brother. Evans puts his hand on his son's shoulder and leans in. He says he wants to tell him the truth. Ted doesn't understand what his father is talking about. Evans tells him that Lilith saved him a long time ago. He remembers going down into the woods to hunt. That's when a demon attacked him and Lilith saved him. Evans talks about how Lilith taught him. She was a good conversationalist and a great teacher for him. One day, Evans asked why the girl did so much for him. The girl blushed and said that he needed a place where she could live when one day a very important person for her woke up. When Evans first heard about it, he did not understand what the girl meant. But now, looking at her and Abel, he began to understand. Lilith had saved him so that she could live peacefully with Abel after he woke up. Evans reaches down and puts his hand on Ted's shoulder. He tells him that his son shouldn't act like Bass. He asks him to befriend Lilith and Abel. Ted smiles and says that his father didn't have to tell him that. He says that Abel is his subordinate. And he also hopes that Abel is his best friend. Evans looked at his son in fascination, and Bass walked down the hallway and smiled. The next day, Ted comes to visit Abel. He waves and says that he is counting on the guy. Abel greets him. Abel reminds the boy that he must quietly enter his office when Abel reads. Ted says that he ignored this teaching. He asks the boy to hurry up and tell him everything about the magic he used the day before. He convinces the boy that he is starting to understand it little by little. It had only been a month since Ted had fallen off the roof, but before Abel knew it, Ted had started to consider him his teacher. Abel had refused the title many times, but Ted hadn't listened to him and continued to call him teacher. Abel looks at the boy's leg and says that his leg is fine. Ted confirms his words. He says that for him it was just a scratch. Abel asks the boy not to lie to him. He remembers how Ted cried in pain and during Bass's treatment. Abel puts down his book and says that they will start practicing again. He mentions that it has been a long time. Ted looks wide-eyed at Abel, who adjusts his scarf and asks if they will start their game again. The boy is silent for a while, then smiles and screams with delight. He convinces the boy that he will definitely catch him this time. Abel grins and says that the boy is really very confident. Abel reminds the boy that he can use the body-strengthening magic he taught him the day before. He asks if the boy has figured it out yet. Ted just laughs and says that they should get started. Abel and Ted were sitting in the carriage. Ted was looking out the window with admiration. At some point, he announced that they were almost there. Abel thinks this is great news. Ted reminds him that they spent almost half a day in the carriage. He thinks it was a long ride. Abel looked out the window and thought that 2 years had passed since he woke up after the regeneration magic. Abel was currently on his way to the royal capital to take the entrance exam for the Arsula Magic Academy. He was sad about having to go to school again. Lilith turned to him and asked him what he was planning to do in the future. The guy thinks for a second and then says that he will continue to travel around the world as an adventurer. Lilith asks if Abel really doesn't know that adventurers have completely cancelled all types of adventure work. Abel recalled how in his past life he was an adventurer and made a living by defeating monsters and selling some of his materials to the Adventurers Guild. Abel wonders if this could have happened because the number of monsters had decreased dramatically, so adventurers were no longer needed. He thinks about how all the books in Lilith's library were very old, so he still didn't know many details. Lilith says that if Abel wants to get a job related to magic, then he needs to go to the Magic Academy. Lilith says that at the present time, if the guy does not get into the Magic Academy, then he will not be able to get a job related to magic. Abel thinks about the academy. He recalls how 200 years ago people called him the unrivaled genius. Lilith asks if Abel really wants to continue sitting at home doing nothing. She says that it is normal for her. Abel says that he will go to study at the academy since he could not depend on Lilith forever. The boy also thought that he needed to broaden his horizons. He had been looking at magical technologies in various fields for 2 years. He noticed that the decline in the level of new mages was simply abnormal. At first, he thought that artifacts were the cause, but then Abel realized that this was not the only reason. Then the guy remembers the teapot that Lilith used. He thought that this thing was quite convenient and useful. It seemed to him that all modern magicians were focused on developing artifacts. Since magic in the present time did not require strict preparation, it seemed strange to the guy that anyone could use these artifacts and write spells there. It seemed to him that everything was very complicated. Suddenly, Abel's attention is drawn to Ted. He puts his hand on his chest and says that thanks to his efforts, Ted's magical abilities have grown. He raises his hand and shouts that he will do everything in his power. Abel notices that Ted has grown. He remembers the first time he met him. Then, Ted seemed immature and a terrible child to him, but when he began to study with Abel, his manners improved significantly. Ted waves his hand in front of Abel. At this moment, Abel thinks about the magic talent. He had a lot of problems with teaching Ted because he was not very smart. Ted gets out of the carriage and shouts that they have arrived. Arsula Academy of Magic. Together, they ride to the arch. Ted looks at the academy and says it's great. He expected something like that from a famous prestigious school. There were guys standing near them. They turned around and caught Abel's attention. They noticed that Abel was without a family crest on his clothes. The boys had heard many different rumors about him. The fair-haired boy says it's terrible. He thinks the standards of Arsula Academy have dropped. The dark-haired boy says that a commoner like Abel should be working in the fields. Abel wasn't surprised by the way nobles were treated as commoners. He thought it was consistent with the current decline of modern mages. Abel recalled that many mages were able to hide their powers, so he was still wary. One of the boys asked how someone with the strongest eyes could enter their academy. The second guy says that there is a recommendation from a house that sends large donations to the school. The blonde guy assumes that it was a bribe and starts laughing. He is sure that Abel will fail the test. The dark-haired guy says that it is impossible. Abel did not care that the academy students were chatting and would not shut up, but Ted got very angry. He asked what the boys were talking about. He asked if they could really judge a person by the color of their eyes. The boy says that his teacher doesn't have to worry about it. Abel never thought that Ted would be able to stand up for him. Abel assumed that in any era there would be those who despised amber-eyed wizards. He was sure that the school's elite treated amber-eyed wizards terribly. Suddenly, a girl comes up to him and asks if the guy is ashamed to discuss Abel. The guy looked at the girl and noticed that her eyes were red and there was a coat of arms on the ribbon. The girl passed by Abel and approached the gossips. She asked the fair-haired man if he was really spreading malicious gossip about a commoner who had just arrived. She thought he was doing something terrible. The boy couldn't say anything in response. He was dumbfounded. The girl said her name, Eliza. She said that in 5 years after graduating from Arsula Academy, she would become a great sorceress who would go down in history. The blonde guy leans over to the girl and tells her to watch what she says. The dark-haired guy asks if he and his friend should teach Eliza a lesson. Ted looks at them, then turns sharply to Abel and offers to help the girl. Abel is sure that it is not necessary. Ted asks why there is no need to protect the girl. Abel says that Eliza is strong. The girl smiles and takes out her sword. She makes a few quick swings and then lowers her hand with the sword under the dumbfounded gaze of the blonde guy. Eliza demanded that the guys leave. She looked at them menacingly. The boys got scared and ran away, apologizing. Abel didn't ask the girl for help, but he still wanted to thank her. He extends his hand to greet the girl, but she pushes his hand away. Eliza glares at the boy and calls him a weak commoner. She is angry because he wanted to touch her body. Abel asks if the girl wanted to help him. She replies that she simply does not like people who gossip. She does not remember giving Abel permission to talk to her. The girl turns around. Pointing her hand at Abel, she says that if he wants her to notice him, he must be more disciplined than anyone else. Eliza finally says that she is only interested in strong men, and then turns around and leaves, fixing her hair. Ted turned to Abel and asked why Eliza was acting like this. Abel replied that he couldn't even imagine. Abel didn't think that such a strong-willed girl would remain in such a benevolent and peaceful era. Abel had a strange feeling. It seemed to him that he had met Eliza somewhere before. Ted and Abel were sitting in the auditorium. Ted was making faces, and Abel was writing something on his sheet of paper with concentration. Abel knew that the entrance exam to the Arsula Magic Academy included 2 types of tests, a written test and a skill test. He remembered that both of these tests had a maximum score of 100, so the maximum score was 200. Abel calmly wrote the test because it was too easy for him. With the help of the test, Abel and the other students checked their skills in reading, mathematics, and writing. The next test was dedicated to the magic test. While solving it, Abel noticed that in the modern world, magic has fallen too much. That is why this test was easy for him to solve. Then Abel and Ted wrote a test on magical techniques. It was a little more difficult than the previous ones, but Abel still passed it easily. Abel was having trouble. He saw a question that required the boy to prove that magic could not create a human soul using the Deeperonica's last theorem. Abel noticed that at the last moment, another problem arose. The difficulty level of the test rose to a completely different level. He knew that this question was made specifically to prevent the examinee from getting the maximum score. He imagines the person who wrote this question smiling slyly, but Abel knew what to do. Abel was the one who wrote the final theorem. Abel remembered that this happened when he was still a child, 10 years old. At that time, the trend of changing the human body was at the peak of popularity, so magicians were looking for a way to create a human soul. At that time, Abel discovered that a famous magician had taken many lives, calling it an experiment that had become a social problem. Abel thought it was something stupid. He understood that it was impossible to create a living soul with the help of magic. This is why Abel decided to put an end to this senseless trend by publishing anonymously Topornik's last theorem. For Abel, it was not meaningless because thanks to these results he was able to complete his reincarnation magic. He also remembered that Topornica was the name of a dog that an elderly couple in his old neighborhood had. Now that Abel thought about it, he realized that the final theorem of Topornik that he had published at the time was incomplete and imperfectly useless. Abel wondered if he should have corrected this error. He thought it was all for the good. Even though he was a child then, he still felt ashamed that he had published an incomplete theorem. Ted turns to Abel and says that he expected the written test to be extremely difficult. Abel asks if he was really difficult for Ted. One of the examiners announces that the written exam is over. She says that she will now take the students to the testing grounds to test their magical skills. She asks everyone to follow her if anyone in the group has a number from 1 to Magpie. Ted stands up and shouts with delight that the skills test will be very interesting. Ted and Abel walk to the training ground. Ted looks around and comments on how big the training ground is. Abel looks around and suggests that the examiners have created the entire area to test ranged magic. The woman points to the side and says that the students will use artifacts to test their skills. The woman asks the students to choose an artifact that matches their eye color. Abel picks up the dagger and examines it. He is convinced that the organizers have not prepared an artifact suitable for amber eyes. Ted turns to Abel and asks if he will use the artifact for red eyes. One of the boys tells the others to look at Abel's lower eyes. At that moment, the examiner comes up to them and says that Abel can use any artifact if there is no suitable one. Abel thinks that should be enough. The examiner asks everyone to be quiet as she is about to explain what they were supposed to do. The examiner points to the targets and says that the students will have to shoot at the targets using their magic. She explains that the targets are made of strong material, so they should not break. The woman tells the students to use maximum power. Abel knew that by using artifacts with a spell written in advance, a mage could measure the ability. Abel understood that it required a large amount of innate magical power and the ability to effectively release magic. The examiner announced that it was time for them to begin. She asked who wanted to go first. Ted volunteered. The woman said that Ted was number 28. Abel looked at the boy and it seemed to him that he was very excited. He wondered if the boy would be okay. Abel knew that even though he had been teaching Ted for some time, the boy's magic was still below average. He wondered if Ted would be made fun of if things continued like this. Ted rolls up his sleeves and walks onto the playground. The examiner says that if the boy is ready, he can begin. Ted yelled that he was going to start. The boy swung his arm and used his magic to launch a fireball at the target. Abel looks at the boy with wide eyes. He believes that he did not show his best result. A small fireball reached the target and crashed into it. Abel assumed that Ted's magic was weak because he was using an unfamiliar artifact. Abel understood everything. He confirmed that the organizers used the dark matter ore to absorb magic. That's why the target won't break even under powerful magic. The examiner shouted out that Ted had shown amazing ability. She wondered why someone as talented as him was taking the general exams. Everyone was delighted. All the students started to approach Ted and ask about his coat of arms, family, and place of residence. They admired the boy's fire magic. Abel looked at everyone unimpressed. The man standing to the side blew smoke from his mouth and said that Ted was very strong. He was a veteran examiner. It seemed to him that they had all witnessed the birth of a genius magician, born once in 100 years. Abel wondered who the man was. He felt like he was sleeping. Then he turned back and began to look at the others. The other students also used fireballs, wind blades, and ice spears. Abel couldn't believe that there were people who couldn't handle magic even if they used artifacts as support items. There were those who missed or couldn't reach. Abel was thinking at that moment that compared to those guys, Bass could be a great magician. The examiner turns to Abel and says that he will be the last one. She calls his number and asks if he will take the test. Even the examiner thought that a person with amber eyes would not be able to use magic. Abel went forward and said that he would pass the test. The woman asked him to begin. Many of the students teased him, not believing that the boy with the strongest eyes could pass the test. Abel remembered that the rules did not prohibit changing and strengthening the spells of the artifact. He changed the speed of magic, the power level, and also supplemented the artifact with an additional operation, bullet spread. Abel raised his artifact and cast the spell, Rain of Fire. The machine broke down and only coals remained after it. Everyone was shocked by the guy's powers. At this moment, Abel thinks that the examiner should not have said that the target is impossible to break. Abel turns around, thinking that the examiners must have used low-grade dark matter for the student exams, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to break the target with such magic. Everyone starts asking how Abel, being a man with the weakest eyes, was able to use such powerful magic. Ted runs up to the guy and says he expected something like this. He was congratulating his teacher. Abel was bored. Everyone kept wondering how Abel could do something like that. Abel was glad that he had corrected the misconception that amber-eyed mages were useless. Eliza stood and looked around. She expected the Ursula Academy to have magnificent buildings. Judging by some of them, one could even say that they were the highest quality in the kingdom. Eliza heard the boys whispering behind the girl's back. They were discussing the girl defending a commoner. The boys thought it was disgusting. They were trying to find out what noble house the girl belonged to. The boys had never seen her family crest before. They assumed that Eliza was from the countryside. They also talked about her beauty. The girl looked at them with displeasure, considering the boys stupid. Eliza assumed that only half of the people in Hall B would be able to pass the test. She believed that less than half of the students would definitely be able to. At this point, the examiner announced that it was turn number 86. Eliza took a step forward. The examiner asked the girl to state her name. The girl bowed and said her name. She said that she would be under the examiner's care. Everyone looked at the girl in amazement. Eliza looks up and asks if she can begin. The examiner sighed loudly, then blushed, smiled, and asked Eliza to begin. The girl stood right in front of the target. She cast a spell. She swung her sword and used the Blade of Fire spell. The attack hit the target squarely. Everyone's mouths dropped open in surprise. The examiner wonders if the dark matter was actually damaged. One of the observers wonders what the spell was. The guy turns to him and says that the spell written in the artifact is for red eyes, so it must have been set to fireball. One of the students in the crowd wonders if the girl really didn't use the artifact. They think it's a violation of the rules. A girl steps forward and says that it is not a violation of the rules, since the girl definitely activated it. At this point, Eliza turns around and addresses the examiner, who was her teacher. She talks about how she simply rewrote the spell. Eliza thought that she could create stronger magic this way. Everyone was amazed that she did it instantly. The examiner turns to a teacher named Fyodora. The teacher says there are no problems. Fyodora convinces the examiner that it is not forbidden to rewrite the source spell in the artifact. She says that this is real magic. The woman says that they only evaluate strength and their magic. The examiner agrees with her. Eliza looks at Fyodora and is surprised by her behavior. It seems to her that the woman is behaving as if she is responsible for an exam. Suddenly, someone calls Fyodora, the teacher. Eliza wonders what happened. Fyodora asks her to go somewhere else because something serious has happened. Fyodora asks the woman who ran up to her to speak more slowly. A woman tells of a student with amber eyes melting dark matter during an exam. The woman mentions that the student used fire magic, which burned the perimeter around the target. Eliza wonders how that is possible. Fyodora asks what the name of the student is and to what noble house he belongs. The woman says that the student is a nobleman living in the province of Lombardy. She calls his name Abel. Eliza immediately remembers the commoner with the amber eyes. She remembers that his name was also Abel. The girl chuckles and says that it's getting more interesting. Ted and Abel were walking down the hallway. Ted was asking his teacher if he was really going to do a great job. Ted was happy to be in the same class as Abel. Abel was saddened by the fact that there was no classification higher than A, so there was no choice but to put him in the same class as Ted. Ted walked up to the door and decided that it led to the Class A waiting room. Abel opened the door. In front of him, he sees a huge number of students sitting at desks. They all looked with apprehension at Ted and Abel, who entered. Ted suggests that rumors are spreading that Abel destroyed a target made of dark matter. Abel closes his eyes and says that he already figured it out. Abel finds this a little awkward, but he thinks that no one will be harmed by it anyway. Suddenly, someone shouts at him. It was Eliza. She asked if the guy minded if she sat next to him. Abel turns to Ted and ignores the girl. She starts to get angry. Eliza asks why the boy treats her like that. She explains to him that he should look at her when she speaks. Abel says that he just keeps quiet because, obviously, a commoner should not talk to nobles. Eliza remembers what she told him when they first met. She says he misunderstood her. Eliza turns her head away and says that she is not a supporter of noble rules. She convinces the guy that she simply does not like weak people. Abel clearly remembers how the girl said that she was interested in strong men. He knows that there are also excellent magicians among the common people, but their share is small compared to the aristocracy. The guy assumes that this is why the girl acts cruelly towards the common people. Eliza nudges the guy with her elbow. Then she asks if the rumors are true. She asks if the guy really destroyed the target made of dark matter during the exam. The guy reluctantly answers. The girl starts asking him a huge number of questions. Abel finds her annoying. Suddenly, teacher Fyodora entered the classroom. Everyone turned around. She asked if everything was in place. Then she announced that she was responsible for this exam. Abel tells the girl that they will continue the conversation next time. The girl agrees. Then she says she knows what the test will be. The guy doesn't understand what she means. Fyodora explains what the final test will be. She says that they will test each student's skill in the form of a duel. She specifies that the outcome of the duel will have a huge impact on the results. Fyodora talks about 3 rules. She says that the match is one-on-one. He says that the winner is the one who destroys his opponent's defense. The last thing Fyodora says is that they chose the pairs based on the results of previous tests to make the duel fair. One of the examiners hung up a chart, and Fyodora said that the students could see their opponents. Ted sighed and was glad that Abel was not his opponent. Abel sees the number and understands that his opponent will be Eliza. The girl shows her number and says she is happy to introduce herself. She smiles widely. The guy begins to understand what the girl was talking about. Fyodora says she will take everyone to the final exam. She explained how the protective work works, and then asked everyone to be careful. Abel thinks that there is nothing special about protective magic. Ted was amazed by Fyodora's powers. Abel and Eliza are challenged to a duel. The girl steps forward. At this moment, students can be heard discussing how Eliza is very strong. Abel looks at the girl and realizes that their battle will attract a lot of attention. The girl turns around and suggests that they start a battle to see each other's abilities. Abel is interested in Eliza's abilities, but refuses to choose a weapon, preferring to rely on his own strength. Eliza laughed, asking if he had any specific reasons for not using weapons. Abel said there were no specific reasons. He was faster at creating magic from scratch. Abel turns his head to the side and, looking at the girl, promises her something that will not disappoint her. Eliza looks at him and smiles. The girl understands that the guy prefers the old way. She chuckles and tightens her grip on the sword. Eliza jumps up and shouts that she likes Abel's method. The guy notices that she is very fast. The girl attacks, but Abel disappears and appears from behind. She turns around and casts the spell, Blade of Fire. The boy dodges. He thought that this attack rate is perfect for a mage of the modern era. Abel thinks about protecting the building while Eliza gets angry and continues to attack. The guy decides that dodging is no longer interesting. He decided to use the spell, Blade of Fire. The girl saw the attack rushing towards her. She was amazed that the guy's attack passed her so easily. There is a huge explosion. Ted covers his eyes as dust and smoke rises. Abel looks at the results of the explosion and assumes he has gone too far. Then he notices a silhouette in the smoke. Eliza attacked, but Abel easily dodged. He was surprised that she continued to fight despite the obvious difference in strength. The guy had not met a worthy opponent for a long time. The boy apologizes and uses the spell, Burning Bullets. He thinks this is the end for the girl. Eliza looks at the spell Abel used in shock. After the explosion, Eliza remains on her feet, breathing heavily. Abel is impressed by her resilience. Fyodora reports that the defenses have been destroyed and asks them to stop fighting. The guy approached Eliza and offered to help, but she refused, saying that the duel was not over yet, despite the defeat. Abel was convinced that this was now definitely a personal duel. He noticed that the girl did not like to lose. Eliza gripped the sword handle tighter and swung. She shouted something that would prove that she was stronger than everyone else. Abel was silent for a while, and then asked if he could ask the girl a question. He asked why she was trying to become strong in a peaceful era. Eliza, looking at the boy, wonders how long the peaceful era will last, emphasizing that the neighboring kingdom of Kerdrea is strengthening its army, preparing for a possible war. Eliza mentions an old incident involving a demon that is being kept hidden to maintain the illusion of peace. Eliza doubts the longevity of the peace, claiming that even without the Demon King, the threat of another war remains. Abel realizes that if there is a conflict, many mages will die due to the low level of magic in this era. Eliza says that these are the reasons why she decided to become stronger. She is going to rebuild the house she grew up in. Eliza throws down her sword, and Abel ponders her words about the house. He guesses that her family suffered for preparing for war, which was considered dangerous. Suddenly, Eliza begins to use a forbidden spell. Spell Rose of the Mad Sky. Abel covered himself with his hand and used the analytical eye spell. He saw that it was a body-strengthening magic with a complex magic formula. The spell was above the level of a student. Abel remembers that he has encountered similar magic before and is confident that he can handle it. Eliza uses the spell Physical Flash, becoming stronger and soaring into the air with wings on her back. The students are amazed by Eliza's flight, believing it to be legendary magic. Abel admits that her fire armor is superior to his fire magic. Abel had no doubt that Eliza was an amazing magician. The girl rose up and told the guy to get ready, because now she would be completely different. Everyone looked at the girl in amazement. She stared at Abel, and the guy waited for her actions. The students did not believe that the magic of flights really existed. Abel understands the complexity of flight magic and admires Eliza's efforts. Seeing her red eyes, he realizes the power of her magic. Eliza laughs, certain that this is the first time Abel has encountered such a spell. Abel completes his analysis. He recalls that in his time almost everyone used flight magic. He forms a seal and uses the spell Dispel Magic. Abel remembered that in order to use Dispel Magic, you first had to analyze the opponent's magic. Abel recognized his opponent's magic, and that was the most important thing. Moreover, he knew the structure. Eliza screamed in shock. She didn't understand how the guy managed to dispel her magic so easily. Abel watched as the girl began to fall and scream. He sighed, and then he jumped up and caught her in his arms. He had no other choice. Abel landed on the ground with the girl. She looked at him with embarrassment. The guy asked if Eliza was really Maria's fire hero. Eliza asks how Abel knew about her magic. He confirms his guess, realizing that she inherited the power of 200 years ago, as well as the straightforwardness of the heroine of fire, Maria. It was because of this that he was able to dispel her magic. He had heard that the Rose of the Crazy Sky was a forbidden art that increased a mage's fighting ability by burning away his life force. Abel turns to the girl and says that she looks just like the hero of fire, Maria. He leaves and tells her to continue improving her skills. The girl looked at the guy in shock. Everyone else's mouths dropped open in surprise. At that moment, Feodora announced that Abel had won. Everyone was shocked. They wondered what just happened. Ted was the only one congratulating his teacher. Eliza was still sitting on the ground. She wondered who Abel really was. The teachers gathered at the university. They discussed the fact that many talented students had enrolled in the new year. One of the teachers asked if they were talking about G3. He was asked what G3 was. The teacher explains that this is a symbol of 3 genius students, Eliza, Ted, and Abel. Another teacher is happy that their arrival will raise the level of the school. The faculty discuss a competition to raise the academy's profile. Emerson calls Abel the only true genius among the G3. The teachers discuss that while Abel's amber-eyed magical abilities are impressive, Eliza may be a better candidate due to her powers. Emerson looks at Abel's test results and is amazed that the boy was able to solve Depornic's last theorem. Emerson reflects on the significance of the publication of Abel's achievements. A man appears, commenting on the interesting questions of this year's examiners. The principal is surprised by Emerson's praise of the student, seeing great talent in him. Emerson clarifies that it is not only a matter of ability, but also of other points that he has thought about. Emerson claims that Abel will be able to become the most powerful magician who will eventually be able to take responsibility for the country. The man does not support the man's enthusiasm and says that he is looking forward to it. Emerson says it's a boy with amber eyes named Abel. The man suddenly makes a strange sound. The principal feels better and asks Emerson to name the outstanding student. Emerson repeats that it is Abel, the academy's top genius with the highest scores. Emerson notices the director's strange reaction and asks him if he knows this guy. The director rubs the back of his head and says he doesn't know him. The director takes the lamp and goes down the stairs. He approaches the standing suit of armor and presses a secret button. The door opened right in front of the director. He goes inside the office and tries to remember where the things he needs are. The man walked up to the table and opened a drawer containing the notes of a man who was going to tell his descendants the whole truth. The author of the letter states that the Demon King was defeated not by the 4 great sages, but by one magician, Abel, who dealt with him alone. The letter states that after the battle with the Demon King, Abel disappeared and was soon forgotten. The letter somewhat asserts that the only true hero is Abel, the man with amber eyes. At the end of the letter it was written that even being the descendants of heroes, one should not go beyond one's limits, and at the end of the letter the director saw the signature of the wind hero, Roy. The director chuckled thoughtfully and sat down on a chair. He remembers his grandfather who had said similar words to him many times. He remembers his grandfather's words that among the 4 great sages there was another one, the lost 5th man. The director looks at the manuscripts. He focuses on the phrase about the man with amber eyes. He wonders if this could just be a coincidence. The director reasons that Abel could not have lived for 200 years and suggests that he is not human. The man becomes lost in thought, concerned about the authenticity of Abel's abilities. Abel enjoyed the taste of coffee in the coffee shop, remembering that it used to be considered a devil's drink, but now it has become popular and almost everyone drinks it. Ted runs into the coffee shop and apologizes for being late. Abel accidentally spills the coffee because of his scream. Abel turns his head and reminds Ted that they are in a coffee shop. He asks him to be calm. Ted laughs and apologizes. Ted hands the envelope to Abel. He says that they finally got their exam results. Ted shows his results and smiles widely as he managed to pass all the exams. He asks what Abel thinks about it and says that he tried his best. Abel is not happy because Ted continues to make noise. Ted hands the envelope to his teacher and says that these are his results. He asks if the boy wants to see what is written on it. Abel closes his eyes and says he doesn't need to do that because he already knows he passed. Ted asks how Abel knew about it. Abel notices the damage to the seal on the letter and realizes that Ted did it. He also realizes that Ted's happiness is tied to passing his exams. Ted expected something like this from the teacher. He says that Abel knows him well. Abel thinks that Ted needs to grow 200 years to make fun of him. Abel then turns to Ted with a question. He asks who the boy came to the coffee shop with. Ted looks away and remains silent, and his guest runs away. Ted leans over and whispers to Abel that it is actually Eliza watching them. He says that when he arrived at the coffee shop, she was already standing near the entrance. Ted admits that he was embarrassed to tell Eliza that she was not hiding well. Eliza suddenly comes out from around the corner, laughs, and notes a chance meeting with Abel in a coffee shop. Eliza compliments the cupcakes at the coffee shop, but Abel notices that there aren't any. He interrupts her and asks her point blank why she came. Eliza says that the guy doesn't have to be rude. She says that she just wanted to know what grade he's in. Abel looks at the girl seriously. Abel asks why Eliza needs information about the school. She replies that she wants to know more, hoping to get into the same class as him. Eliza looks away. Abel thinks that the girl told the truth. He looks at her. Then Abel's attention is drawn to Ted. He says that the girl will find out about it anyway, so there is no point in delaying it. Abel agrees with Ted and says that he can tell the truth. Ted turns around and says that he and Abel are in Class A. Ted hopes that the girl is in that class too, along with them. Abel thinks that it will be harder for them to be in the same class, since Eliza and Ted are very noisy. Eliza claps her hands and is happy that they are in the same class. She turns around and says that they will see each other again. Before leaving, Eliza approaches the shopkeeper and asks him for a bag of cookies. She then turns to Abel and Ted and says that she will still become stronger than them. Finally, the girl thanks the shopkeeper and leaves with the bag of cookies. Abel wonders what the girl really wanted. Ted laughs and says it was great. He starts eating and says that they will be constantly busy now. Abel says that they need to start preparing to move to the dorm. Ted agrees with his teacher. The boy says that he can't go to school every day from his home to the royal capital. He thinks that moving to a dormitory is the best option. Abel wonders if everything will be okay. Ted says what will happen to Lilith if his teacher lives in the dorm. Abel says that Ted is right. He is sure that Lilith should not be forgotten. He thinks that the girl prepared for this in advance. Suddenly Lilith appears near the guys. She says that she expected something like this from her master. She says that the guy knows her very well. Ted is amazed, gets up from the table and asks what Lilith is doing in the establishment. The girl just laughs. Abel looks at the girl and asks what kind of costume she is wearing. Lilith puts on her glasses and says that she needs to tell the guy something. She tells him that she was hired as a teacher at the Arsula Magic Academy. The girl winks. Ted is shocked. Abel just looks at the girl, as he already thought that she would do something like that. Abel realizes that if Lilith decides to become a teacher, she will not have problems finding a job at the academy thanks to her connections, experience, and support from influential people. Ted asks what trick the girl used. The girl smiles and says that there was a vacancy at the academy. Abel assumes that the girl has connections with the director. Lilith attracts Abel's attention. Then she says that she will be his teacher at the academy now. She will continue to keep in touch with him. Abel smiles. He thought that Lilith was a very smart girl who would find a way out of any situation. Ted supports the girl. He looks at Abel and says that they need to practice before enrollment. Abel asks if the boy wants to practice because his skills on the exam were terrible. Ted is amazed by the boy's reaction. He remembers that the examiner praised him instead. Lilith smiled, and Ted continued to say something. Abel at this time thought that his days in this company would still be noisy. On the day of departure, the guy was standing in front of the window. Someone knocked on the door. The guy turned around and saw Lilith. The girl asked if her master was ready. The guy answered that he was ready and then turned his head and said that he had already packed his things. Lilith comes closer to the guy and asks if he wants to leave. The guy turns away again and is silent for a while. The guy understands that she has become attached to this ordinary piece of land, where they have lived for more than 2 years. Lilith says that they will return during the summer holidays. She smiles at the guy. Abel turns around and says that it's time for them to go. As Abel and Lilith leave the house, Ted runs up to them, trying to hurry them up. As Abel calmly got into the carriage, Ted shouted to him that the entrance ceremony began in a day. Ted shouts that he will have many friends, and Abel at this time thinks that winter is already ending, and this means that spring will begin. He believes that this is the beginning of a new life. Abel began to fall asleep. He opened his eyes and noticed that he was leaning his shoulder on Lilith, who was smiling at him. The girl asked the guy if he slept well. The guy replies that he slept well, and then apologizes. The girl convinces him that everything is fine. Lilith approaches Abel and says that in the future they will have few opportunities to meet each other in this way. Abel pushes the girl away and says that she will have to behave more restrained at the academy. She agrees with him. Abel notices that Ted is sleeping uncomfortably and decides to wake him up. Lilith tells him that they will arrive at the academy soon. Abel uses magic to wake Ted up. Ted didn't wake up. Abel started trying to wake him up. He says that they will soon arrive at the place, so the boy needed to get up. But Ted continued to sleep, so Abel used the tiny fireball spell. The fireball hit Ted's hair. The boy woke up and started screaming because he was so hot. Abel tells Ted that they are almost there. Ted doesn't understand what is happening. He is surprised because he slept for so long. Ted felt like he had woken up from a bad dream. Abel insists that it was just a dream. Lilith informed Abel that they had just arrived. She pointed to a building that was the school dormitory. They all got out of the carriage together. Abel says the building is very big. Lilith heard that only first years live in this dorm. Ted says there are only 4 dorms. Lilith also tells that there are laboratories and shops in the dormitories. Abel says that he will inspect them later. Lilith approaches Abel and says that it is time for her to leave. Abel asks what the girl will do now. Lilith mentions her duties as a new teacher, and Abel agrees to Ted's suggestion to continue on their journey. Abel and Ted enter the dorms, where they are met by Feodora. She confirms that she is watching the building and gives them uniforms. Abel remembers that Feodora cast protective magic during the exam. The guy points out that the uniform was very smooth. Then the woman says that they can wear whatever they want in the dorm, but wear the uniform outside. Abel asks if the form was really enchanted. Feodora says he is right. She tells him that the form was enchanted. Abel criticizes the quality of the charms on the form, deeming them below average work. Feodora notices his displeasure, but he replies that everything is fine. Feodora hands over the keys and advises to visit the gym, noting that modern students neglect physical education. Ted and Abel enter the room, and Ted notices Feodora's strictness. Ted also says that Feodora is a beautiful woman, but he doesn't think she's popular with the guys. Abel looks at the uniform and asks Ted not to tell the woman that. Ted thinks that Abel's room is much bigger than his room. He assumes that this is because Abel has the highest grades. Abel says that everything is exactly as the boy said. He says that he would like to transfer the charm on the boy's uniform if he does not mind. Ted asks if Abel will really do it. Abel confirms his words and says that the day is just special. Ted hands his uniform to the boy and says he is very kind. Abel says he is not doing this out of gratitude, but to practice. Ted turns to the teacher. Ted asks what a charm is. Abel sighs and closes his eyes. He asks how the boy was able to pass the exams. Abel asks the boy if he knows the properties of all types of eyes. The boy says he does. Ted tries to determine the properties of different colored eyes, but is wrong about the black ones. Abel corrects him, explaining that those with black eyes have the magic of production, which enhances and changes the properties of objects. Abel mentions that charms are especially useful among magic givers. He gives examples of how charms can increase the sharpness of a sword, the strength of a shield, and so on. Ted pretends to listen. Abel asks if Ted is listening to him. The boy asks what that means. He says he really is listening to the boy. He says he just has a hard time understanding. Abel thinks there is no point in explaining anything to the boy. He decides that he must experience everything himself. Abel announces that he is finished and hands Ted his uniform. The boy thanks him. Ted puts on the uniform and adjusts it on his body. He says it looks great. He feels his body lighter. Abel says everything is fine. Ted thinks he will wear the uniform all the time. He asks if Abel wants some buns. Abel asks what buns. Ted shows a bag of buns. Ted takes one of the buns out of the bag and says that it is a special product of the Lombard territory, snow-steamed bun. Abel has never heard of anything like it. Ted turns around and shouts that he is going to say hello to the neighbors. He says that he is sure to make many friends with the help of buns. Abel sighs, thinking that nothing has changed. Ted is still noisy. The guy thought about the boy's words about friends. He is sure that such a sociable person as Ted will definitely be able to find many friends. Suddenly, the guy hears someone's voices behind the door of the room. He hears Ted asking what he did wrong. The other man demands that he shut up. Abel looks out of the room to see what is going on. He saw Ted with other students standing in front of him, asking him how much longer he was going to make fun of them. Abel realized that they were in trouble because of the buns. The light-haired boy accuses Ted of making fun of him. Ted, holding out a bun, justifies himself by saying that he just wanted to make friends. Abel watches the situation from the door. The blonde boy forbids Ted to communicate with them, calling him a poison base and implying that he is ruining the atmosphere. Ted is surprised and remembers that poison base destroys river ecosystems. Ted hands over the bun anyway and says it was made in his town. He asks the boy to try it. The boy knocks the buns out of Ted's hands and kicks them, refusing to eat them. Ted is outraged by the cruelty. Ted kneels down to collect all the buns. The boy shouted at him that no one will eat his buns. Abel watches all this and thinks that Ted's parents never taught him not to waste food. Abel suggests that this is a problem that requires his intervention. Just as he is about to leave the room, Eliza appears. Eliza approaches Ted and says that she will try his buns. Abel sees the girl bend down, take one bun, and taste it. Everyone looks at her, dumbfounded. The girl chews and chuckles thoughtfully. The fair-haired boy was amazed that the girl picked up the bun from the floor and ate it. The girl licks her fingers and says that she gives the bun the highest rating. She liked the bun. Ted is delighted to see Eliza. One of the students standing behind him can't believe she picked up a bun from the floor and ate it. He says there's a limit. Eliza turns her stern gaze to the students and says that throwing away food and making fun of your classmates is terrible. She thinks that the boys are the ones who are badly behaved. The student who is standing behind Ted starts to get angry. The boy says that's why he doesn't like people like Eliza. She asks what he just said. Abel sees Eliza and another student exchanging barbs. He understands that she supports Ted, but he doesn't know how to respond to her behavior. Abel approaches the girl, puts his hand on her shoulder, and says that she can leave the rest to him. The girl turns around and says the boy's name in embarrassment. The blonde student looks at Abel in surprise. The fair-haired boy points at Abel and says that among those who entered this year, there is even a nobleman with inferior eyes. He laughs with everyone else. Abel wonders why the same thing happens over and over again. He suggests that this company consists of elite students who first attended preparatory school. The boy guesses that they, simple students, are being teased as poisonous perches. The bright boy points at Abel and asks why he is silent, starting to speak about him disdainfully. Abel is tired of the teasing but does not want to fight. He sees that Ted is tense and shaking and hurries to explain that he did not mean to offend anyone. Ted told the blonde student not to dare speak negatively about his teacher. He swung his arm and hit him. The student flew away. Eliza was shocked by what was happening, and Abel watched everything unimpressed. Ted glared at the blonde student. At that moment, his friend ran up to the student and asked if he was okay. he realized that his friend had passed out. Abel looks at Ted and thinks that it was amazing. The unconscious student's friend turns around and glares at Ted. He orders the others to grab Ted. The dark-haired student raises his arm and is about to hit Ted. But he and all the other students are suddenly thrown back. Ted doesn't understand what happened. The other students look at their hands and wonder what just happened. Abel looks at them all in silence. The guy then turns his gaze to Ted and assumes that it was the reflect physical damage charm on the form that worked. One of the students got scared. He said it was time for them to leave. They took their friend and ran away. Abel was surprised that even elite students couldn't recognize such a simple spell. Ted turns to the teacher and says that he did nothing, but his opponent was still defeated. He finds this incredible. Ted assumes that his open power has finally awakened. Abel wants to remind the boy that he cast a spell on the uniform right in front of him. Eliza calls Ted and approaches him, studying his form. She is surprised by the complexity of the spell and is delighted by it. Ted is confused, but Abel is not surprised because he expected something like this from the heir of the hero of fire. Eliza asks where Ted found such a master of magic. Ted looks at Abel to keep quiet about him creating the spell, fearing trouble. Ted nods sheepishly. He says that it was Abel who enchanted his form. He starts to talk about how his enchantments are first-rate. Abel interrupts the boy, grabbing him by the collar of his shirt and pulling him along with him. He says that it is time for them to leave. Ted was asking where they were going, and Eliza at that moment looked at Abel in amazement and could not believe that he did something like that. Eliza remembers that the guy showed incredible abilities during the exam, and now he even cast a spell. She wondered who Abel really was. Ted tells the teacher that the uniform, enchanted by Abel, helped him during the attack. He thanks Abel and offers him a bun, assuring him that it is delicious and not the one that fell on the floor. Abel takes a bun, bites it, chews it, and says that overall they taste good. Ted was shocked. He thought everyone was very harsh. Abel advises Ted to cast a spell on the wrapper to improve the taste of the buns. Ted admires the teacher's idea. Abel says he won't help him with it. Ted scolds. Abel adds only that he will teach him how to do it. Ted is not sure he will succeed, since his eyes are red. The boy then says that he will do everything possible to make friends. Abel looks at the boy and likes his determination. He sighs and admits that he has a strong spirit. Ted followed Abel. He asked what Eliza was doing in the boys' quarters. Abel replied that he didn't know. Eliza suddenly remembers that she wanted to look around the shops and the entire dorm with Abel. Ted and Abel were running down the hallway. Ted was shouting that they were already late, and Abel was running after him at that moment, reading a book. Abel reassures Ted that they still have time. Ted apologizes and explains that he hasn't slept due to stress and the uncomfortable pillows in the dorm. Ted is surprised that the students have not complained to the teachers about his punches. Abel explains that they are too proud to admit defeat to an ordinary student. Ted hangs his head and says that the next time they see each other, he will apologize to them. Abel stops in front of the classroom door. Ted asks him what happened. He thought the teacher didn't want to come in. Abel noticed that the door had a built-in magical source. If he opened the door, he would stand out a lot. He thought it was all a lot of trouble. Abel says that he will open the door himself, but Ted will go in first. The boy does not understand him. Ted asks why he should go first. Abel takes hold of the door handles and says that Ted will soon understand everything himself. The mechanism works and the sound of various musical instruments is heard. The doors open fully. Ted is the first one to step inside and is amazed. The students were surprised when Ted activated all the mechanisms of the singing door. He asked the teacher what happened. Abel answered that it was the magic of the grant. The mechanisms react to the magic of the opener. The principal enters the auditorium and laughs. He is glad that he was able to hear the Knights March this year. He says that this happened for the first time in 20 years. The principal introduces himself and says his name, Michael. He congratulated all the students on their admission. Ted turned to Abel and asked him if the boy knew that the academy's director was a descendant of the hero of the wind Roy. Abel wonders if this is true. Abel hasn't heard anyone mention Roy in a long time. Ted says it was mentioned in the academy brochure. The director thinks he has said enough, so he invites Lilith onto the stage. Lilith comes on stage and says she will be in charge of training. She introduces herself and says she hopes they all get along. Everyone looks at the girl in amazement. Lilith finds Abel. The guy chuckles questioningly. And she smiles back. Some students thought Lilith smiled at them. They started arguing, and Ted sighed because Lilith was very popular. Suddenly the boy feels something and turns around. Ted asks him what happened. Abel thought he was being followed. The guy turns back and says that nothing terrible happened. He thinks that it doesn't matter yet since he doesn't feel threatened. Ted closes his eyes and makes a noise. He says they stand out a lot because they sit in the back and center. Ted felt that everyone was looking at them. At that moment, the students with whom they had had a conflict were looking at them. The blonde boy was not among them. Eliza appears next to Abel and Ted. She says that these students are understandable since there are 7 outsiders in this class, including themselves. Abel turned to the girl and asked why she sat next to him. Eliza says there was no special reason for it. She is confident that she can sit wherever she wants. Emerson enters the classroom and greets the new students. He introduces himself and says that he will be their new homeroom teacher. He is looking forward to meeting everyone. Abel looked closely at the teacher. Abel knew Emerson was a powerful magician and had heard that he had claimed leadership of the Kronos Magic Association. Ted confirmed his fame. Ted explained that Emerson was a master of modern magic and a renowned artifact developer, considered the most powerful mage of the era. Rumor had it that he had created the difficult question for the entrance exams. Abel agreed because the question was indeed difficult. He began to feel something was wrong again. The teacher looked at the boy with a smile in response. Suddenly, one of the students raises her hand, planning to ask a question. Emerson listens attentively. A student asked why Emerson had decided to take over the leadership. She had heard that Professor Emerson rarely taught because he was always busy with his research. Abel folded his arms and concluded that Emerson did not usually teach. Emerson began to rub the back of his head and say that he was not interested in anything except himself. Emerson said that he only took the position of teacher because it made it easier to get research funds from the kingdom. Everyone is shocked by the teacher's answer. Then the man becomes more serious and says that he has decided to take charge of their class for another very important reason. Emerson looks at Abel and says that there is something he wants to make sure of. He says that is why he decided to become their homeroom teacher. The man then leaves the room as the lesson ends. Ted stands up, asking if they should introduce themselves. He has been thinking for a long time about how to do this. Eliza says that Emerson is acting very strange. Abel and Ted leave the classroom and go outside. Abel goes down the stairs alone and suddenly meets Lilith. The girl asked the guy if he was really leaving already. The guy gave a positive answer. Lilith asked where Ted was. The guy said he went to make friends. The girl asked if that was true. Then Lilith looked around, and when she realized that there was no one nearby, she turned to the boy and asked if she could kiss him. Abel asked what the girl was talking about. Lilith said that Abel's form was very beautiful. Abel crossed his arms over his chest and said that the girl didn't change. Lilith comes closer to Abel and starts flirting with him. Abel turns around and says that the girl should be careful when they are at school. Lilith laughed. Suddenly, the boy felt threatened. He sent an ice needle and hit the device that was watching him. Lilith asked what it was. Abel assumed that it was some kind of magical artifact. Abel says that ever since the ceremony he has felt like someone is watching him. He assumes it is Emerson, as he kept looking at him during the morning lesson. Lilith suggested following Emerson, but Abel dissuaded her, warning that it could lead to trouble. Abel goes back to the dorm building and asks Lilith to just be careful. The girl obeys Abel. At this point, Emerson was sitting in his room chuckling. He realized that the guy had noticed his device. Emerson decided he needed to make the device thinner and improve it so he could record sound. Emerson was glad that he had finally met a wizard who was better than him. He wanted Abel to show him his full power. The teacher stood at the board and wrote down an equation, explaining how it was calculated. Abel thought that several days had passed since his school life had begun. He was very bored in the new class. The teacher finished the formula and erased it abruptly, shouting that all these equations would be on the test. Ted tried to finish the equation and wondered why the teacher erased the equation so quickly. Abel hoped that the class would have the most capable students to learn new things, but after looking at the teacher's equation, he realized that it could be simplified by cutting out dozens of steps with the right formula. Abel heard Ted getting angry because the teacher erased everything again. The boy didn't pay attention to him because he was thinking about how he would spend the next 5 years in such boring classes. Abel considered classes a waste of time and practiced magic on his own. When the teacher unexpectedly called him to the board to solve an equation, he was caught off guard. Abel is surprised because up to this point, no one in this class has been called to the board. He stands up and goes to the board. Abel solves the equation on the board without any problems because this example was very simple for him. Abel puts down the chalk and returns to his place, dusting off his hands. He understood that the teacher thought this would be a difficult task for the student. The teacher was amazed that Abel solved the equation correctly. When Abel takes his seat, Ted admires him and says that he expected the guy to solve the equation without any problems. Abel decides to continue his research. The boy then raised his head as he heard other girls in the class talking about him. The teacher shouted that there was no talking allowed in the classroom during the lesson. At that moment, Abel was about to move on to the most interesting part of his research. The teacher says he will continue the lesson. At this moment, one of the students turns around and looks at Abel with displeasure. After class, Abel went to the library. He sat there until the evening. In this place, he could concentrate on his research. Abel was glad that the academy had many libraries, especially a small one where he could enjoy solitude. Abel could smell the faint scent of books. He also liked the pleasant light in the library. He thought that if a person has the opportunity to study in such an environment, then it is quite good for school life. Suddenly, Eliza came into the library. She was surprised when she saw the guy. The guy didn't expect to see her either. Eliza approaches Abel and says that it's all a coincidence. She realized that the guy is also studying in this library. Abel doesn't think it's a coincidence. He assumed that someone else might choose this place to study, but in Eliza's case, it's definitely not a coincidence. Abel and Eliza are sitting at the same table and studying. The guy notices how deeply the girl is immersed in studying her textbooks. Abel decides to help the girl solve the equation. He says that two formulas can be used. She does as he says and asks if she did everything correctly. The guy gives a few more hints. The girl understood what the final result should be and solved the equation. Eliza understood how the boy solved equations. Abel noticed that the girl's insight was much better than Ted's. At that moment, the boy sneezed somewhere in the dorm. The girl and Abel continued discussing the solution to the equation. So they sat for the night. When Abel and Eliza were going down the stairs, the girl decided to thank him. The guy asked why. Eliza thanks him for helping her with her studies. It was thanks to him that she was able to understand the material. Abel says that there is nothing special about it. Then the girl calls him and asks if Abel would like to go to the royal capital next weekend. Abel asks why he needs to go to the royal capital with Eliza. The girl says that she wants to thank the guy. Eliza assures Abel that he will find many delicious fruits and rare sweets in the capital. Abel is skeptical, but the girl insists that the food there is truly wonderful. Then, Eliza raises her index finger and says that they can go to a second-hand bookstore. She tells him that this store sells books. She convinces the guy that you can sometimes find rare books there, but the most important thing to her is that the books are cheap. Abel repeats the phrase about the used store. There were no ancient books in the school library, and Abel expressed a desire to visit the store. The girl was delighted and offered to go together. The girl leaves and says that she knows a lot of good restaurants in the kingdom's capital. The guy is surprised that Eliza is still talking about food. Then he hears someone laughing. When Abel and Eliza leave the library, they meet a blonde student named Mars. Mars says that being popular is very hard. He asks if Abel agrees with him. Eliza pointed at the boys, reminding Abel of the incident with Mars, whom Ted had once hit. Mars got angry and said that they were now in the same class. Abel sighed and asked what Mars wanted from him. Mars is so angry that the vein on his forehead bulges. Mars says that village students have a bad habit of forgetting themselves. This irritates him greatly. He asks how a boy with the weakest eyes managed to get into the academy. One of his friends suggests that Abel used unfair methods. Abel looks at the whole company of these students and wonders why all this is happening to him. All the students take out their weapons. Abel says that they are going to hold another entrance exam. Suddenly, something runs very fast past the students. They raise their hands and notice that their weapons have been taken away. Eliza looked at Abel in shock. The boy was standing with Mars's weapon in his hands. He picks up the regalia and asks if Mars really hoped to defeat him with pathetic toys. Mars looks at the boy in shock. Abel noticed a protective block on Mars's regalia that prevented him from casting spells, and thought that a tool without the ability to create was useless. He suggested that the artifact be repaired, but Mars did not understand what he meant. Abel pointed out the cracks in Mars's artifact, saying that they were preventing the spell from working. He returned the artifact and asked Eliza to leave, taking her hand, which confused her. Mars turns around and stares at Abel. He tells the boy to wait until the next lesson. He vows to make everyone laugh at him. Everyone was standing outside in their sports uniforms. Ted was glad that it was time for class. Abel noticed that Ted looked excited. Abel and Ted heard the teacher's voice and turned to look at him. A short man approached them and introduced himself as Cantor, the new physical education teacher. He mentioned that those who had attended the preparatory school already knew him and expressed his excitement about the upcoming job. A student asked Cantor about a woman from the bar, irritating him. The teacher demanded that the conversation be stopped, and another student promised to introduce him to a new girl. The teacher again demands that everyone be quiet. He says that he does not need help from his students. Abel wondered what was wrong with this teacher. Eliza comes forward and asks why he only talks to the students he knows. She doesn't like it. Ted crosses his arms and says that Eliza is right. He claims that the academy seems a little weird to him. Ted says that during classes you can notice that teachers have some sort of favorites among students. The feeling of alienation is most evident during physical education. Cantor says, "What?" Cantor announced that the lesson would be held in the format of the game, hunting, one of those held at interschool competitions. The students from the preparatory school were already familiar with this game and responded joyfully to the news. Ted turns to Abel and asks if he knows anything about this game. The guy replies that he knows nothing. Cantor explains that during the hunt, the students will use gloves that will be artifacts. When the man wants to explain the game, he is interrupted. He asks what happened. One of the students says that they already know the rules. The man says that the boy is right. Cantor noted that some students did not know the rules of the game, which caused one of the children to taunt him. Eliza became indignant and clenched her fists, but Ted urged her to calm down. The teacher says he will explain the rules again. At this point, Eliza gets furious, and Ted tries to calm her down. Cantor explained that Hunt is a team game where shooters attack and rabbits defend. The game is based on the hunting traditions of the nobility. The teacher explains that the shooters will try to hit the rabbits with their bullets and knock them down, and the rabbits must try to avoid the shooters' bullets. Finally, the man says that after a few minutes, the shooters and the rabbits switch places, and the team with the most rabbits left at the end wins. It seems very simple to him. The man points to the boxes and tells the shooters to choose their own gloves. He adds that if the students already have their own gloves, they can use them. The man also explains that there are 3 more types of bullets that students can use with the glove: a spear that specializes in speed, a balanced sphere, and a disc that can easily change trajectory. One of the students says that it looks quite dangerous. The man tries to convince her that none of the bullets will cause harm. He asks her not to worry. The man puts on a glove and says that the bullets are weak without a magical attribute. He shoots straight at Ted. The man looks at the boy and says that if the students hit the rabbit with their bullet, the bullet will create a shockwave that will cause the rabbit to fall. He says that when the rabbit falls, it loses. The teacher criticized Ted for his inability to dodge the attack, implying that such players had no business in the game. Ted stood up from the ground, realizing the reason for Eliza's anger. The man then looks at Abel and says that rewriting the source of the glove's shot magic is forbidden. Therefore, the students can only use the glove's magic. He suggests that they split into teams. Abel, along with Ted and the rest of his team, stand opposite the Mars team. One of the students approached the teacher and asked what she should do. The man said that she just needed to join one of the teams. One of the students says that even though they are ordinary village students, this does not mean that they know each other. Mars comes up to Abel and wishes him luck. He smirks and says he will take revenge on the guy. Abel realized that the teacher and Mars are in cahoots. Abel wasn't going to lose to Mars. He heard the girl asking what she should do. He heard that many students were having trouble with physical exercise. The guy agrees that it is right to use your mind, but he still considered the most important thing for a magician, the body. Eliza came up to one of the students and said that everything was fine. She suggested that she follow her. The student turns around, looking at the Mars group, and says that they don't wish them well. The Mars group turns around and smirks. Eliza assures the girl that everything will be fine. She says that hunting is a traditional sport. The girl is sure that no matter who their opponents are, they will not be able to break the rules of the game. Abel wasn't so sure about the girl's statement. It seemed to him that Mars and the others were plotting something. At this point, Eliza says that they must win fairly. Eliza puts her index finger up and says they will win. She walks forward and everyone else follows her. The teacher asks to decide who will be first. He tosses a coin. At this point, Eliza chooses tails and Mars chooses heads. The man looks at the coin and says that Mars's team will be the shooters. The man tells Team Eliza to enter the area. He says there are only 6 rabbits, so there will be 3 hunters. The man gives the command to take position and then raises his hand and yells for the game to begin. Mars put on his glove and shouted that it was time for them to begin. Ted aimed his spear at Abel, who easily dodged the slow attacks. Given the superiority of the shooters and the spacious area, Abel easily avoided the blows. Abel turns around and looks at Ted, who was dodging the attacks. Several attacks were flying at him at once. Abel understood that the winner would be the one who could avoid the bullet flying into his blind spot. A spear was thrown at Abel, which was a very predictable attack. He dodged and the spear flew at the student with glasses, who also dodged. Then the spear came back and hit him. The student fell to the ground and dropped his glasses. He tried to find them. Then Abel looked from him to the other students because he heard their screams. Abel sees that almost his entire team has been defeated. The disciples could not dodge the spear. Abel expected this to happen. Mars laughed and counted the number of remaining rabbits. Abel realized that the hunting team was cheating. The teacher demands attention and says that everyone who was hit must leave the field immediately. One girl from Abel's team says she doesn't want to play this game. They all saw the bullet change direction, so they were afraid to play. Abel knew that the bullet shouldn't have hit the student with glasses. He assumed that the hunter's gloves had target tracking magic applied to them. Abel looks at Mars and realizes that he cheated. Eliza points her hand at the boy and says that he is not playing fair. Mars demanded that Eliza stop accusing him without evidence. He chuckled and pointed out that the spear bullet could not change direction on its own. He also commented on her appearance. Eliza got angry at Mars's comment, but Abel ran up and talked her out of reacting to the provocations. He helped her avoid an attack from behind and asked her to be more careful. Then she turned to him again and thanked him for his help. Abel considers Eliza a very honest girl. The fans started making noise. Abel thought that about 5 minutes had passed since the lesson began. He found Igor boring since the rabbits were allowed to dodge. Abel thought it would be more interesting if they were allowed to shoot down the hunter's bullets. Abel heard one of the students behind him shout at Eliza to be careful. Abel noticed Yukari's calmness against Eliza's emotionality and thought that she could become a strong sorceress if she corrected her character. The hunters were outraged that the rabbits were successfully dodging, and Mars suggested attacking the weakest. The hunters begin to attack and hit Yukari directly. Eliza screams as she worries about the girl. Mars lands the last blow on the girl and she screams. Abel and Ted look at the hunters with displeasure. Yukari continued to attack. At that moment, Eliza ran up to her and demanded that the hunters stop, as the girl had already been knocked out. Mars insisted on continuing the attack, claiming that Yukari had already lost, but Eliza stood up for her, stating that Mars's team must respect the rules. Eliza was stabbed in the back by a spear, and one of the hunters celebrated that there were fewer rabbits left. Abel watched the situation, displeased with the team and Eliza's excessive emotionality. He suspected that Yukari was deliberately attacked to demoralize their team. Ted approaches the teacher and asks if he saw what happened. He says that the hunters continued to attack the girl even after she lost. Suddenly, a spear flies at Ted. The teacher's eyes widen in surprise. Abel realized that the Mars team had deliberately angered all the rabbits so that they would open up. The teacher asks what happened. He says he didn't see anything because he was looking away. He says Ted was just hit and asks him to get out of the field. Ted gets really angry. Then he goes to Abel and apologizes. As a result, Abel is left alone. Mars laughed. Mars stated that Abel, despite his abilities, was still an ordinary student and attempted to attack him. Abel dodged, thinking that losing would make the opponents overconfident. Abel didn't even need to use any magic to avoid the bullets. He thought that he would just dodge until time ran out. Ted expected Abel to be unable to hit him even once, even by 3 opponents. Eliza says Ted is wrong. Eliza noticed that Abel was standing still, just dodging the attacks. Ted looked at what was happening in amazement. Abel understood that the hunters used the same techniques, so they were easy to avoid. Abel knew that serious difficulties would arise if the hunters blocked the escape routes, but so far he easily dodged all attacks. Mars decided to use a combined attack. A huge number of bullets appeared and flew straight towards Abel. Abel realized that the glove had also been given bullet spread. He was bothered by the fact that the hunters were openly breaking the rules. Mars laughed and asked what Abel would do now. He was sure that the boy would not be able to dodge the attacks. Abel could easily dodge, but he didn't want to show off his speed in public, so he decided to cover himself with his hands. Mars declared that Abel had given up, pointing at him. He demands that Abel bow down before him. At one point, all the bullets just explode. Mars wonders how something like this could happen. Mars asks his teammate what happened. The guy suggests that their artifacts are broken. Mars then hears Abel say that they used too much mana. He assumes that's what caused the bullets to explode. He says that was dangerous. Abel accused the hunters of breaking the rules, noticing the changes in the glove. Suddenly the timer rang, signaling the end of 5 minutes of play. He reports that the first half is over. As a result, Abel's team managed to survive. Mars turns around and curses. The guy thinks that Abel was just lucky this time. Abel approaches his team. Ted says Abel was great. Everyone else supports him. Eliza turns to Abel and asks if he really used anti-magic. The guy does not answer her question and suggests discussing strategy. Abel was the last one left standing in the team and declared that they would win the next round or else they would lose. He had a secret plan. Abel's entire team dons gloves. Ted shouts that it's time to restore their honor. Eliza says they can provide her with offensive magic. Eliza decided that she would not stop even if the Mars team begged her for mercy. Abel looked at the girl in bewilderment. He thought that putting her in the role of a shooter was not the best decision. Yukari calls out to Abel and wishes him luck. Abel remembers that Yukari was offered the role of a shooter, but she refused because she was not strong. Ted approaches his teacher and says that they will definitely win. Eliza says that she is very excited. Abel thought that Yukari was better suited to be a cheerleader, but he was confident in Ted and Eliza's motivation, knowing that they are ready to fight for victory. Eliza hears the students from Team Mars laughing and looks at them angrily. They mock the girl and say that their team has no chance of winning. When the girl starts to get furious, Abel comes up to her and puts his hand on her shoulder. He asks her not to worry about trifles and leads her to the playground. The teacher asks if everyone is ready for the second half of the game. He sees that all the students are ready and announces the start of the round. Mars gave the command to his friends to line up. They all followed the command. Abel saw that they had become a circle. Ted shoots and assumes that the Mars crew decided to get together and make a bigger target to make them easier to hit. Eliza starts shooting too. Mars gave all his friends commands and helped them dodge attacks. They all successfully dodged and avoided attacks. Ted starts to get angry because he can't hit the target. Abel realized that Mars's crew was sharing information with each other to protect their blind spots. The boy assumed that Mars had learned this in prep school. He stared at the boy. Then Abel turned his gaze to Ted, who was shooting randomly. Abel knew that at this rate their team would not be able to achieve anything, but the guy could not do anything since he was not allowed to stand out. Abel, eager to avoid attention, approached Ted and quietly shared his plan. Ted, trying to catch his breath, wondered why the conversation was necessary now. Eliza calls out from afar, asking what they are talking about. She didn't want to be left alone. Ted gives Abel a thumbs up and says he understands. He goes forward to carry out Abel's instructions. And Abel at this moment says that Eliza is tired, so they need to finish this as quickly as possible. Mars sees Ted get into a fighting stance, then raise his gloved hand and cast some kind of spell. Abel looked at Ted and tried to figure out what kind of introduction he had decided to make, but he didn't interfere since Ted was still acting according to their plan. Ted summoned a red storm, and a hail of bullets rained down on Mars's team. Mars looked up, confused. Dust rose in the air. Everyone started hiding from her. When the dust settled, everyone watched as the Mars team was routed. The rest of Abel's team were amazed at what Ted had done. They wondered how he had managed to do something like that. Ted rubbed the back of his head and smiled. Abel was glad that his plan had worked. He turned his head and saw that the teacher was angry. The teacher announced that since all the rabbits had been defeated, the game was over. Abel's team ultimately won. Mars's team was unhappy. Abel was unaware that Emerson was watching him through the artifact again. The director visited Emerson and noticed the mess in his room, to which he replied with a smile that cleaning was not his strong point. The director says the man doesn't have to worry about it. He asks what he wanted to tell about Abel. Emerson showed the principal the screens, marking the start of gym class. He noticed Abel's hand, and the principal was surprised to discover hidden magic. Emerson talks about how the guy made everyone think his friend had performed the magic. Emerson also points out that the symbols appear simultaneously. He says that if the magician creates the source from scratch, then this does not violate the rules. The director asks how Abel was able to do this, despite the fact that the attribute's magic is not difficult to handle. The director notices a video feed from a surveillance drone built by Emerson, which allows him to observe Abel in real time. Abel is looking directly into the camera. and then the image on the screen disappears. Emerson said this was the third drone he had destroyed, and jokingly added that next time he would make one for eavesdropping from afar. The director, knowing about Emerson's genius, became interested in who had awakened such an obsession in him, suggesting that it was Abel. Ted turned to Abel. He asked what happened. He wondered why he raised his hand. The guy says everything is fine. He convinces Ted that he just saw a bug. Ted told Abel that they needed to change their clothes as soon as possible and go get something to eat. When they entered the locker room, she saw Mars. Ted walked up to Mars and made a sudden move. Mars got scared, thinking Ted was going to hit him, but Ted just handed the guy a bun and said he wanted Mars to eat it. Abel thought that Ted, despite the difficulties, remained kind and tried to make friends. Ted suggested to Mars to improve their relationship because they lived in the same class. Ted demanded an apology from Mars, who, frightened, promised to eat the bun and ask Yukari for forgiveness. After the lesson, the relationship between them improved. Ted was called the Demon King, and everyone around him began to fear him. The entire Mars team apologized to Abel's team. Theodora was walking towards the academy. On the way, some students greeted her. The woman also greeted them. Theodora then noticed Lilith and asked if they could talk. The girl turns around and greets Theodora. Theodora greeted Lilith, a new teacher who had been working at the academy since spring. Little was known about Lilith. She had been hired by the headmaster, but her background and education were a mystery. Theodora wanted to discuss her documents with her. Lilith said that she had handed over the documents in the morning, and Theodora thanked her. The woman knew that many accused Lilith of using her connections to get a job at the academy. But now most of them changed their opinion of her and recognized her as a capable person, including Theodora herself. Theodora and Lilith approached the door. Lilith opened the door and greeted the teachers. The physical education teacher immediately greeted her. The cantor began to flatter Theodora and suggested meeting her in the evening at a good establishment with beer. Theodora looked at him with displeasure. Lilith refuses. The man chuckles and says he was rejected. Behind the teacher's back, the others begin to whisper that the man is trying to ask the woman out again. Theodora asked the physical education teacher to stop persistently inviting Lilith on dates, considering such behavior disrespectful. The man smirked and asked Theodora if she was jealous of him and Lilith, surprising her with this question. Theodora froze, looking at him in bewilderment. At this point, the man says that this is a real disgrace. He tries to convince her that she looks good too. He says that the woman might interest him if she were younger. Theodora starts to get angry because she was only 27 years old. The man notices the woman's reaction, so he puts his hand on her shoulder and tells her not to worry. The man smiles and, showing his thumb, says that he is sure that the woman will sooner or later find the ideal person. Theodora is very angry. She adjusts her glasses and thinks that this is a huge disgrace. She has never been laughed at like this before. Lilith approaches them. She turns to Cantor. The man asks if the girl could have changed her mind. The girl forgot to tell the man something. She had heard that he supported a certain group of students, so much so that he even turned a blind eye to cheating and hunting, which was considered an important sport. Lilith says that this is why the director wanted to talk to the man. Cantor becomes gloomy and says that he understands everything. Theodora looks at Lilith and thinks that everything is okay now. The school bell rang. Theodora was in the gym at the time. She was lifting weights. The woman was very angry about what Cantor told her. She cursed and lifted the barbell. She did not understand how he dared to mock her. Then Theodora assumed that the man was not mistaken. Because women in this country usually got married in their teens and had children in their 20s. That was the case with all her friends. It's not that Theodora wasn't popular in her school years. Boys would come up to her and ask if she wanted to go out with them. But because of her bad character, the woman always failed. Usually she suggested going to the gym on the weekend. The woman began lifting the barbell again, remembering Cantor's words about the ideal woman. She assumed that the man thought she was crazy. She knew where to draw the line between ideal and reality. The woman herself knew perfectly well that no man would appear before her just like that. The woman finished working with the barbell. She knew best how muscles worked. Because she had a special relationship with muscles. The woman turned her head to the side and noticed that some guy was running on a treadmill. The guy was breathing heavily. The woman tried to remember his name. She thought his name was Abel. She saw him almost every day at the gym. The woman liked Abel's running form. She looks at the guy and sees that he is well trained. Then the woman looks embarrassed and turns her head to the side. She was trying to figure out what she was just thinking. She realized that it didn't matter how mature the guy looked because he was still younger than her. Because the woman was distracted, she dropped the barbell. The woman closed her eyes, but then opened them and saw that Abel had managed to grab her. Abel asked if Theodora was okay. The woman was amazed that the guy lifted the barbell with one hand. She wondered where he got such strength from. Then the woman stood up. She tried to say something, but she couldn't because she was so embarrassed. The woman wondered why she couldn't just thank the guy. Abel says the woman was acting weird. It seemed to Abel that the woman was not focused. The woman realized that the guy had noticed it after all. Abel says that Theodora is the only one using the gym at this time. The woman was wrong about Abel. Theodora thought he was indifferent to the others. She had no idea that he was actually so attentive. The woman was still able to thank the guy. The guy put on his jacket and said it was time for him to leave. The woman clutches her hand tightly to her shirt as she watches Abel leave. Theodora knew that Abel was Lilith's younger brother. She was pleased to realize that his older sister was younger than her. The woman blushed when she realized that this was unacceptable. She decided that she had to stop thinking about it. Theodora realized that this way, her chances of getting married were decreasing. Abel was sitting in his office reading a book. He closed the book because he decided it was time for him to go. Abel remembered how Eliza thanked him for helping him with his studies and invited him to the royal capital. Abel promised to go with the girl to the royal capital. The boy takes out a form to indicate that he is going shopping. At this school, you had to get permission before you could go anywhere. Abel understood that there was a chance that he would be refused if teachers who did not like him were put on duty. Abel headed towards the exit of the academy. On the way, he met Lilith. The girl greeted the guy and smiled at him. She was glad to see Abel. Abel came closer to the girl and asked if she was really the boss. Lilith smiled again and confirmed it. The guy handed the girl a form and asked the girl to sign it. He thought that there would be no problems with Lilith. Lilith began to look closely at the form. She realized that it was permission for a day off. It seemed unusual to her. Abel said that he had a small business in the capital. Lilith looked away with displeasure. The girl remembered that a student named Eliza had submitted exactly the same form with permission to take a day off. Lilith asked if Eliza was Abel's classmate. She wondered where they were going to go together. Abel found Lilith's behavior very strange. He did not expect her to react like that. Abel decides to tease Lilith a little. He said he didn't know, and then asked if the girl could guess. Lilith looks at Abel seriously at first. Lilith jumps up abruptly and kisses him. The girl blushed, and the guy just cursed to himself. Suddenly, the voices of the students passing by were heard. They thought they saw Lilith. One of them asked what the teacher was doing. Abel's eyes widened as he heard the students' footsteps approaching. The boy tried to stop Lilith. As the students approached, they saw Lilith standing right in front of Abel, scolding him. She claimed that the boy should have applied for a day off the day before leaving the academy. The girl continued and said that she had wanted to talk to the guy about this for a long time. She asks if Abel is aware of his responsibility as a student at Ursula Academy. While Lilith continued to pretend to scold the guy, Abel closed his eyes and wondered how she could calmly think about all this in this situation. The students turn and leave. One of them is surprised that Lilith is so easily expressing disapproval. Her interlocutor laughs and asks what she expected. The blonde student says that she also expected to see something interesting. She asked her friend if Lilith had a loved one. Lilith notices that the student has left and stops pretending to scold Abel. The boy turns around and is glad that the students have left. He asks what Lilith was thinking. Lilith turns her head to the side and says with displeasure that she is very sorry that she wanted to have physical intimacy with Abel. Abel looks at the girl with displeasure, and she remains silent for a while. Then the girl blushes and says that she is not acting like that because she is jealous. Abel asks if the girl was really jealous. Lilith sighs and repeats once again that she is not jealous at all. Abel smiles and says that he rarely sees a girl jealous. Lilith grumbles discontentedly. The girl calms down and says that she will still sign Abel's permission for the day off. She asks him to be more careful. The guy promises that he will be careful. Abel looks at Lilith and thinks about how she usually looks unperturbed. He smiles, accepting that the girl has a much sweeter side. Abel was walking down the street. He raised his head and looked at the clock tower. The guy realized that he still had some time. Abel also remembers what Lilith said about Eliza leaving the academy before him. The boy came closer to the clock tower and saw Eliza, who was standing and waiting for the young man. Abel thought that the girl looked completely different, just standing in front of the clock tower. Eliza saw Abel and immediately greeted him. Abel apologized and asked how long the girl had been waiting for him. Eliza did not immediately understand what the guy meant. Then she said that she had arrived just recently. The guy asks what happened to the girl. Eliza says that she was just a little surprised, because she never thought she would hear an apology from the guy. Abel asks who Eliza thinks he is. The girl says that the guy doesn't have to worry. She says that he has the honor of accompanying her on this day. Abel and Eliza enter the building. The girl goes up the stairs and says that the building is called the Reuven Memorial Clock Tower. The guy asks what events are we talking about if this tower is a memorial. Eliza says she doesn't know. Eliza stops near the mechanism of the chapel. Eliza says she likes the fact that on such clear days, you can see the entire royal capital from it. Eliza asks the guy to look at the view of the sea. The girl says that she sees a steamship. She tells that this steamship uses magic stones as fuel. Abel recalls reading about something similar in one of the books. He thinks that the ship looks amazing in real life. Abel smiles, thinking that his day will be fun. Eliza notices the guy's smile. Eliza is embarrassed. Abel turns to the girl and asks what happened. She says everything is fine. Then the girl suggests moving on to the next point. Abel agrees. He really thought the view was amazing. Abel and Eliza went on. The boy looked at various things. He thought that he had learned a lot about the culture of this era. The guy couldn't even imagine that the city would be filled with a variety of different things that he had never seen. Abel stopped near the game center. He asked the girl what kind of building it was. The girl stopped and looked at the guy. Abel says he hears many different voices coming from this building. Eliza says that this building is called the game center. The guy asks what they do there. Eliza says that this is a place where everyone can spend their free time and money. Abel did not understand what this means. But the girl's explanation aroused a little curiosity in the guy. Abel thought about how magic in modern times is much weaker compared to what it was 200 years ago. The guy was amazed that even in this situation people spent their energy on creating various entertainments. Abel supposes that all this happened because peaceful days have come and no one is worried about the war. Abel asks if he and Eliza can go to the game center. The girl agrees. She says she has never been to places like this. Eliza walks inside the play center with a smile and asks what exciting things they can find. At this time, Emerson's drone was watching them. He flew after the students and watched from afar. Abel and Eliza go inside. They see a huge number of slot machines and several tables with dealers. Eliza thought that this was their first visit to a gaming center. She said that this place has quite a lot of different games. Abel saw cards, chess, and many other things. The guy knew all these games. Then he turned his head to the side. Abel noticed the slot machines. Eliza said she was curious about these machines and what they were for. Abel said he had read about them in books once. Abel explained that in these machines a person can get a jackpot with the tokens they bought. The guy also said that if a person gets a jackpot, the machine gives out an even larger amount of coins. Then the person can exchange them for real money. Abel remembered what was also said in the book about how all the guests come for one simple reason, thinking that they will be able to significantly improve their financial situation, even if, as a result of the game, they will have no money left. Abel cannot understand how the brains of such people work. Eliza laughs and says that it sounds quite funny. Suddenly, someone calls out to Abel and Eliza. It was the skeleton who said that the students from the academy are not allowed to play slot machines. Eliza gets scared and clings to Abel's hand. The guy says it's just a fake that moves with magic. The girl gets embarrassed and jumps away from the guy. She becomes embarrassed and covers her face with her hands, trying to hide from the guy. At this point, the skeleton points to the all-ages play center area and says they can play there. Abel thanks the skeleton. Abel and Eliza go to the all-ages area. They see a huge number of more harmless machines. Abel felt a completely different atmosphere. Eliza saw some kind of machine gun and immediately went up to it, pointing it out to Abel. The girl noticed a dwarf monster inside the machine. The girl blushes and says that she loves these toys. Abel looks at the machine and remembers that it is called a game tap. The boy notices a toy inside him. Abel says that he has seen this monster somewhere before. He asks what kind of dwarf monster the girl is talking about. Eliza turns to the guy and looks at him. Abel notices that her eyes sparkle. Eliza starts talking about how the dwarf monsters have a whole line of characters. The girl says that these monsters were created based on legendary beasts that existed in the distant past. Eliza says that there are more than 200 dwarf monsters in this collection. She also heard that it is becoming more and more popular among young people. Abel says that now he understands what is going on. He did not even imagine that the girl is a fan of toys. Eliza points to one of the toys and says that she once loved this particular monster named James the most. The girl says that the monster named James does not have the kind of appeal that would make girls go crazy over him, but Eliza is sure that this monster was very strong. It becomes clear to the guy. He thinks that this is very similar to Eliza, considering that she likes strong people. Abel says that James is a mutated monster that was born from violent magical particles erupting from the ground. Abel remembered this monster and how it turned people into stone with just its breath. Because of this, ordinary adventurers could not fight it. Abel and the heroes were sent to deal with it. Now that Abel thought about it, he thought those times were truly nightmarish. Abel remembered how they came to the monster's lair and saw the inhabitants of 3 villages that had been completely turned into stone. Abel says that James's stone breath was indeed a huge problem, but they were able to deal with it in the end thanks to the correct use of wind magic. The guy explains that after that they had to create a healing stone to save the villagers. Abel falls silent and covers his mouth with his hand. He thinks that this is not a good thing. He wonders why he always gets nervous when talking about the strong enemies he fought. Abel thinks that he should be more careful. Then the boy turns his gaze to the girl when he hears her laugh. She didn't think that Abel could joke. Abel closes his eyes and says that now the girl knows about it. He decides that it's worth leaving everything as is. Eliza leans against the glass of the machine and asks the guy if he thinks she's weird. The girl says that she means that she remembers other more attractive monsters. But why does she like James in particular? Abel never thought that a person like Eliza would worry about something like that. Abel replies that he doesn't think the girl is strange. He believes that the most important thing is not how he looks on the outside, but the true nature that he hides inside himself. Eliza is delighted and says that the guy is right. And Abel looks away and thinks that this toy is much cuter than the real James. Then Abel notices that a huge number of guys were watching the girl who went down to the machine. One of the guys says that he can look at the girl forever. Abel thinks he should get the girl out of this play area as soon as possible. He asks if Eliza needs a toy. Eliza asks him again, and then says that she would like to have a toy. She adds that it is impossible to pull it out with a small claw. Abel puts a coin in the machine and says that this is very naive. He asks if that's not their job as magicians, to make the impossible possible. The guy uses an analytical look and understands that the creators of the machine set the claw strength to the lowest level and intentionally complicated the controls. Therefore, no matter how many coins a person spends, the chance of winning will still be close to 0. The guy believed that the creators of the machine were dishonest. Abel decided that he would first enchant the claw with the magic of grip enhancement and return its power. The guy starts moving the claw, hooks the toy, and gets it. Abel gives the toy to Eliza. The girl blushes. Abel closes his eyes and thinks that this is his second meeting with James after 200 years. He thinks that time passes very quickly. Eliza hugs the toy and says that she will accept it and also that she will take care of it. Abel notices that the girl has stopped looking him in the eyes. Abel and Eliza headed to the coffee shop. The girl ate pancakes and said that they were very tasty. At that moment, Abel wondered why the girl had stopped being shy. Abel thinks that Eliza has a lot of food, despite the fact that they have already visited many shops. Eliza points to the guy's portion and asks if she can try his food. He agrees and hands over a pancake. Eliza bites off a large part of the pancake and says that the guy's pancake is also very tasty. She holds out her pancake and says that the guy can try it. Abel tries it and says it's delicious. Abel thinks that the cooks made the pancake this way on purpose, so that the taste of sweet milk would be the highlight of the dish. Even though Abel was not very fond of sweet food, he thinks that the food from this place would be one that he could enjoy. Eliza smiles widely and says that she knew about it because it was her favorite store. Abel suddenly says that the moment when they tried the pancakes was quite unexpected. Abel says that people call this an indirect kiss, so the guy was a little surprised. Eliza is very embarrassed. Abel assumes that the girl was so engrossed in the delicious food that she didn't even notice what she did. Eliza looks away and says that such things are not normal. She says that an indirect kiss is nothing special. Eliza changes the subject and says that this place has delicious herbal tea. Abel looks away and says that he understands everything. Eliza was still trying to convince him that he was wrong. The girl calms down. Abel decides to ask her if the girl thinks that the atmosphere on the city street is very different from other places. Eliza smirks and says that she thinks the same. She says that this street is a little special compared to others in the royal capital. She says the street looks retro. Abel agrees and says with a smile that he feels nostalgic. Eliza looks at the guy in confusion and asks what he just said. Abel wonders what he said. Then he realizes that for him, nostalgia is retro for people of the new era. Eliza calls out to the guy. Eliza asks if she can ask a question. Eliza asks who Abel really is, to note 8. Eliza asked Abel who he really was. The girl looked intently at Abel. Abel knew that sooner or later the girl would ask him this question, but he couldn't imagine that this moment would come so soon. Abel assumes that if people find out that he is a magician, reincarnated after 200 years, then he will have problems, and this may interfere with his dream of a peaceful school life. Abel thought about how to answer this question. He then sensed that Emerson's drone was following them again, so he asked the girl to tilt her head slightly to the side. At first, Eliza didn't understand why the guy was asking her for something like that. Then she finally bowed her head and asked if she had followed his instructions correctly. Abel replied that everything was correct. A second later, Abel pointed his finger to the side. He used a spell. The spell that destroyed the drone. Eliza turned to the side to see what happened. She couldn't understand what the guy did. Abel apologizes and says that there was a bug behind the girl's back. Abel wondered why the people who were interested in him were always so stubborn, just like Emerson. Abel thought he was being too kind, as he turned a blind eye to Emerson spying on him at the academy, but he thought it was a different matter to spy on his personal life. Abel knew he had to do something about it. Eliza turns to Abel again and asks him if he really used all his magic. Abel's eyes widen in surprise. The guy can't believe that the girl thought he used his magic to the fullest. Abel tensed up because Emerson's drone was very agile. The guy understands that the drone would have definitely dodged his attack if Abel had held back. Abel released a little of his power, but he couldn't imagine that the girl would think it was his full power. Abel says that's ridiculous. He asks where Eliza will find a person who would use 100% of his power on some ordinary insect. Eliza thinks about it and agrees with the guy. Then she accidentally drops the cup she was holding and lets out a squeak. The girl notices a sudden action. She turns her gaze to Abel. Eliza sees that the guy is holding both cups in his hands. Abel asks if it's her cup he just caught. Then the guy hands her the cup back and asks the girl to be careful. Eliza thanks the guy. Abel drinks his tea. Eliza looks thoughtfully at her cup. Abel apologizes for distracting the girl. He remembers the question again. But Eliza suddenly interrupts the guy and says that he doesn't have to think about such things. She assures him that everything is fine. Eliza looks away and says that the guy does not have to answer this question. She asked him to forget about what she asked. Abel wondered why the girl changed her mind so abruptly. He thought it would be good for his current situation, as lying about his origins never brought anything good. Eliza turns to Abel again. She asks him if he will accompany her through the royal capital next time. Abel smiles and says that he will do just that. The girl's eyes widen in surprise and she blushes. And so ended Abel's first walk through the royal capital. Abel and Eliza were heading back to the academy. They spend most of the ride in silence. At some point, Abel began to feel like he was being watched again. But it wasn't Emerson's drone. Abel knew that the strange auras were coming from living people. Abel assumed that the observers were going to make a move soon. He wanted to end their boring game as quickly as possible. Abel turned to the girl, apologized to her, and said that he could not go with her. Eliza asks what happened. Abel apologizes again and says that he remembered his business that remained in the capital. Eliza lets the guy go and says that in that case, everything is fine. Eliza says they will see each other in a day at school. The guy supports the girl and asks her to be careful. Eliza leaves, and at that moment Abel comes forward and asks the observers to leave. He says he knows about them. The mysterious girl stood behind the tree and chuckled. She realized that Abel had let Eliza go because he had noticed the presence of observers. She appreciated his action because she loves smart people. A gray-eyed sorceress came out to Abel, who was excellent at changing the color of her body and blending into her surroundings like a chameleon. Abel looked at the sorceress and decided that the small amount of clothing on her body was a kind of increase in the effectiveness of her magic. He remembered that only black-eyed mages were able to change the color of their clothes. The sorceress winked at the boy and asked if he wanted to have some fun. Abel ignored her question and asked a counter one. He asked where the second observer was hiding. The sorceress puts her hands on her hips and realizes that the boy was able to detect even the second observer. There was another wizard standing on the tree branch. He was cursing because he had lost his advantage. He couldn't imagine that he would meet a young man who would be able to sense his presence. Abel looked at another wizard and noticed that his eyes were green. Abel assumed that the boy used wind magic to increase his speed and track him, thus hiding his presence. The wizard asks who Abel is. The sorceress smiles and says that Abel is the one when he recognizes that person. She says that one should not be surprised by the boy's outstanding talent. Abel notes that both wizards are very strong for the modern era. He thinks that they will be stronger than those he met after awakening. Abel already had someone in mind who could hire these wizards. He decides to check this person later. Abel asks the wizards who asked them to watch him and what they will receive as a reward for this. The wizard apologizes and says that they are professionals. He convinces the boy that professionals do not reveal names, even if it costs them their lives. Abel closes his eyes and says that everything is clear to him. He thinks that is excellent news. Otherwise, he would be bored if they broke before he finished his warm-up. Abel says he is very sorry. He says that both wizards will not leave alive. At that moment, the wizard, who was standing on a tree branch, jumps up and strikes the guy. The guy really feels sorry. After all, he hadn't had a chance to fight anyone since he woke up. The wizard was cursing because Abel had managed to dodge his attack. The sorceress couldn't believe that their target was an ordinary guy from the academy. Abel never thought that he would find two interesting opponents at once. He apologizes in advance because he had no intention of holding back during the fight. Emerson believed that in their world there would be no one who would seriously pick a fight with an ordinary beetle, and even less would there be anyone who would discuss the stars with a monkey. Little Emerson sits and plays with his construction set. When Emerson was a little boy, his mother came to him and asked if he really was taking apart relics. The boy replied that he was. He wanted to create a more powerful weapon. When the boy entered the academy, he saw other students bragging about their new relics. Emerson approached one of the students and said that he had a beautiful relic. The boy turned and looked at Emerson with displeasure. Emerson at this moment looked closely at the artifact and spoke about its magical structure and form. He asked the boy if he wanted to improve his artifact. The boy refused. Emerson apologized and said he understood. He heard one of his students say that geniuses always have everything going well. The students gathered together and began to discuss Emerson. The boy heard them say that he was self-confident. Emerson believed that people were right when they said that talented people are always alone. When Emerson first entered the Magic Academy, he tried his best to be accepted by the other students. But soon he came to the opposite decision. Emerson didn't understand why he should try to make friends with people who were stupider than he was. It really irritated him. Emerson was constantly bored among people, so he spent most of his life studying artifacts. Emerson examined the diamond. At that moment, he was thinking that the diamond would never show its brilliance if it was not steamed, and to polish the diamond, another diamond was needed. Emerson asked everyone to wait. He was going to make all the magicians regret it. He was planning to make the whole world revolve around him. Unfortunately, Emerson was not that strong. No matter how talented a person he was, it was absolutely impossible for one magician to completely change the world. Emerson wondered what he had to do to change the world. He was very angry. Emerson understood that it didn't matter how talented or intelligent a person was. As long as he met his equal, he was an unpolished piece of rock. Emerson understood that he was no exception. No matter how hard Emerson tried, he could not find anyone who was his equal, neither in the association nor in the Academy of Ursula. When Emerson checked his entrance exam results, he noticed something strange. That day, an unexpected turn of events occurred for Emerson. Appeared who was able to perfectly solve the last theorem of Depornik. Emerson recognized his name immediately. Emerson was amazed that Abel could give a detailed description of how to improve the theorem. He immediately realized that Abel was an unusual student. Emerson wanted to know who Abel was. Emerson believed that if he could find out who Abel was, he would surely be able to achieve even greater heights. Emerson walked down the street and thought that the fight between the wizards and Abel should have ended by now. Emerson believed that no matter how strong Abel was, he was still just a boy who could not defeat the wizards he sent to him. Photos of wizards. Emerson was curious to see how far Abel would go to defeat professional wizards named Storm Bardo and Enchanting Missy. The teacher wondered what the outcome would be between the boy wonder and the best magicians in the world. Emerson chuckled as he couldn't wait to see the results. Emerson opened the door to his office and walked in. The man was very surprised to see Abel sitting at his desk. Abel sat and drank tea. He crossed his legs and apologized to the teacher for the intrusion. Emerson asked what all this meant. He wanted to know how the guy got into his office. He said that his office was protected by a magical barrier. Abel sighed and asked if his office was really protected by a magical barrier. Abel looked away and said that better than a magical barrier would be a simple piece of paper between the door and the doorway. Emerson looks at the boy and realizes that few could pass through the magical barrier, but Abel did it with ease. Emerson smiled and started rubbing the back of his head. He decided that he couldn't panic right now. He says that he's very sorry that the barrier didn't stop Abel. Emerson comes closer to the guy and asks why he came to his office. He suggests getting straight to the point. Abel puts his cup down and demands that Emerson stop following him. He then looks at Emerson and notices that he is adjusting his glasses. The teacher asks what the guy is talking about. Abel asks the man to stop pretending. He says that his friends told him everything. Emerson's eyes widen in surprise. Emerson couldn't believe what the wizards told him because they were professionals. He didn't think they were capable of losing to anyone. The man suggests that Abel used mind control magic on them. Emerson asks what will happen if he refuses to stop following Abel. Abel looked at the man seriously, and Emerson grinned. Abel instantly becomes very gloomy and says that he will deal with the teacher. Emerson asks what this means. Abel becomes calm again and sips his tea from his cup. Emerson smiles and says that he lost this time, so he will fulfill Abel's request. Abel gets up from his chair and says that in that case he will go. The man stops him and asks if he can ask him a question. He wants to know what Abel's goal is. Abel says his goal is to live like an ordinary student. Emerson's eyes widen in surprise. Then the man laughs. He asks if Abel is telling the truth. He claims that the guy's strength is something every person dreams of. He convinces the guy that if he wanted, they could change the whole world together with strength. Abel looks at his cup and asks the man again. Then he puts the cup on the table and says he is not interested. Abel leaves the office, and Emerson hears the door slam and falls to his knees. He was struck by an incredible thirst for murder. Emerson had met many geniuses in many different cities, but Abel was very different from them. Emerson stood up from the floor. He laughed because Abel was incredible compared to all of them. The man put his hands on the table. He was very interested. Emerson decided that someday he would definitely surpass Abel. Eliza took a shower and thought about her and Abel's walk in the capital city. As the girl got out of the shower, she thought that her day had gone wonderfully. The girl liked the fact that Abel was very nice and smiled during their walk. Then the girl falls onto the bed and sighs. She thought she was a little stupid. She wondered how to find out who he really was. The girl rolled over. She understood that everyone thought Abel was an unusual guy. That's why she was curious about who he was and why he had such incredible strength. Eliza was upset that even after their meeting, the gap between them had not narrowed at all. Then the girl looked at the toy that the guy got for her. She took James and hugged him. She was curious about what the guy was doing at the moment. Eliza's eyes widened suddenly, and she rose from the bed. She felt something strange. The girl hugged the toy and thought about why she wanted to see the guy immediately. Suddenly, the girl remembers that she did not thank the guy for James. She reached for her briefcase and took out the rules of the academy. Eliza read that visiting the rooms of the opposite sex was prohibited. She was pleased that in case of emergency this rule could be avoided. The girl jumped up and realized that in that case, everything was fine. He decided that this was the very case when she could go and thank him. The girl looked out of her room. She didn't see anyone in the hallway, so she decided to continue looking for Abel's room. Eliza knew that in the first-year student dormitory, boys lived on the first and second floors, and girls on the third and fourth floors. The only problem was that the teachers also lived on the third floor. The girl realized that going up the stairs was not the best idea. Eliza realized that there was no other way out. She decided to risk going down by jumping out of the window. Eliza managed to jump up the tree and climb down it. She felt awkward because she could be seen at any moment. The girl went down to the right floor, assuming that Abel should be somewhere nearby. Eliza saw the open door. She went to it and saw Lilith, who was sitting next to Abel. The girl did not understand what the teacher was doing in Abel's room. Lilith at that time was asking how Abel's day went. The guy thought for a while and then said that he liked everything. Eliza didn't understand why the teacher was in Abel's room at midnight. It was very late. Lilith asked Abel if she would mind if she spent the night in his room. Abel refused and said that they had to be careful in the dorm. Eliza wonders what's going on. The girl could not understand what kind of relationship there was between Abel and Lilith. Then Lilith approaches the guy and asks him to at least let her kiss him. Eliza blushes when she sees them kissing. Eliza was shocked by what was happening. She wondered again what kind of relationship Lilith had with Abde. The girl fell to the floor and crawled away from the door. The next morning, Eliza met her friend and told her everything that had happened. Yukari was shocked. Eliza asked Yukari if she thought Abel and Lilith were dating. When Eliza lowered her head after the question, Yukari said that she shouldn't worry. Eliza asks why she shouldn't worry. Yukari smiles and says that Abel and Lilith are brother and sister. Eliza blushes and then asks if it's true. Yukari confirms her own words and asks if the girl really didn't know about it. Yukari explains that it is a very popular story among the first years. She thought that Abel and Lilith were great because the girl was an amazing teacher with a cute face and the guy was the best student. Eliza looks away and asks what happened last night. She wondered why Abel and Lilith kissed if they were actually siblings. Yukari guesses that Lilith was showing her love for her brother. She says that in some strong families, kissing is a normal thing. Eliza asks if this is really normal, then the girl thinks about everything that happened. She starts to smile and says that Yukari is right. She decides to believe that Lilith and Abel are sister and brother, so everything is okay. Then Eliza's stomach growls. Eliza laughs and says that they were able to solve the problem, so she is hungry. Yukari offers the girl to eat her cake. She says that she ordered 2 dishes that Eliza might like. Eliza says that she loves Yukari very much. Eliza takes the plate of cake and thanks Yukari. She says that they have come a long way to get here. Eliza says that she has not yet decided whether she likes the strawberry cake or not. She mentions that chocolate cake has been very popular lately. Yukari listens attentively to the girl as she talks about cakes. She was confident that her friend would be able to overcome all the obstacles that would come between her and Abel. The students watched Abel, who was on the treadmill for an hour. They could not believe that he could do physical labor for so long. Abel noticed that despite the fact that it was a day off, there were almost no people in the gym. Suddenly, Abel heard a scream. Ted ran into the hall and was glad to find his teacher. Ted approaches Abel and says he has been looking for him for a long time. He asks if Abel was really at the gym the whole time. He wonders why the guy didn't invite him along. Abel says he can't concentrate when Ted is around. Abel asks why Ted was looking for him. Ted remembers and says that he wanted to find out something from his teacher. He asked if Abel had decided which research group he would join. Ted was thinking about joining the intelligence group. Abel was thinking about research groups. He knew that their academy had a system that allowed research groups to work independently after school. Abel understood that even though these groups were called research groups, most of them were just having fun, but some groups could actually receive a reward for their achievements. Abel says he hasn't decided what he wants to join yet. He wasn't interested. He asks if Ted wanted to know anything else. Abel believes the most effective way to do magical research is to do it alone. Ted asks the guy not to say that, as it was a great opportunity. He convinces Abel that he will be able to find something interesting. Abel wonders if it's true that most research groups are for fun, is just a stereotype. It was hard for Abel to know if it was true or not without seeing it with his own eyes. That's why he finally agrees to go and see. Abel and Ted walked through a huge number of different tables with representatives of the research groups. Ted was amazed at how much there was on the site. There was a girl standing to the side asking who was interested in the dragon riding research group. One of the boys was asking the students to join their hunting group. Next to them was the restoration magic research group. Abel thought that it all looked very much like a festival. Suddenly, someone approached Ted and asked if the guy had a minute. Ted was scared. He noticed the magical armor on the stranger, and then asked what he wanted from him. The guy in the magical armor apologized for scaring him. He said that he was wearing the armor that they use in matches. The guy gave his name as Seagull. He wanted to know if Ted had any interest in armored combat. Seagull says that a talented student like Ted could become one of them. Ted asks what armored battles the guy is talking about. Seagull explains that it is a ball game in which a person wears magical armor. Seagull says that the game is quite difficult because it requires a lot of physical training. He says that it is somewhat similar to hand-to-hand combat. Ted thinks. He says he's not into sports, but he thinks it's something interesting. Ted points to Abel and asks if they can both get in on this. Seagull looks at Abel, confused. Seagull asks if Ted really wants to play with the guy with the amber eyes. Ted says Abel is very strong. Abel just stands there and says nothing as he is forced to join. Suddenly, another guy appears and says he won't let this happen. 2065. He is convinced that if they accept a guy with inferior eyes, their reputation will go down the drain. Seagull turns around and addresses the guy as captain. Abel decides that this is a great chance to leave, so he tells Ted that they have to go. Ted tries to stop the guy. He understands that the guy is angry with such words. He offers to participate anyway. Abel turns around and, looking at the captain, says that he is simply not interested in playing with the ball. Now the captain starts to get angry. He stops the guy and asks what he just said. 270. Abel turns around and repeats that he is not interested in playing with the ball. The captain says the boy should know that what he hates most is being discriminated against like this. Abel didn't think there would be double standards in this research group. The captain tries to attack the guy. But he can't do anything because the guy kicks him. The captain falls to the ground and Abel takes the ball from him. The captain turns around and starts swearing. Abel asks if he should give the ball back to the captain. A second later, he throws the ball straight at him. Abel thought that if the captain can't catch the ball, it's unclear why he trains at all. Segal comes up to Abel and says that it was incredible. One of his teammates supports the guy. Then everyone decides that they need Abel on the team. They decide together with Abel to accept Ted on the team. All the research groups start running after Abel and Ted to join them. The boys at this point started running away from them. Suddenly, Ted is grabbed and dragged away. The boy does not understand anything. The research group of Battles and Armor decided that Ted will join them. Then the group of Hunters says that Ted will join them. Ted tries to stop them all. Abel at this moment runs away and thinks that Ted's sacrifice will not be in vain, since he will be able to escape. Abel heard the other groups praising Ted's physical abilities. That's why they wanted him to join them. Abel agreed with the research groups because Ted did have good physical abilities. Abel thought that no matter which research group Ted joined, he would still be at his best in any of them. Abel decided to go further and look at the remaining research groups that were calling for people to join them. Abel looked at all the research groups several times, and none of them interested him. Abel thought that a research group founded for sports would suit him, but their restrictions, in the form of no days off, put him off. Abel also thought about joining the magic research groups, but they had a very low level. The only thing that surprised Abel was that the seniors also recruited foreign students. Abel had noticed that research groups usually had a negative attitude towards foreign students, but everything changed. Suddenly, Abel heard someone's loud voice. It was a dark-haired man with glasses who called on others to remove war from the world. The man called for people to join their magic eradication research group. He assured everyone that they would work for world peace. Abel didn't understand why these people were acting like this. He assumed that they had entered this academy to study magic. He couldn't understand them. Abel heard a familiar voice. He looked at the guy who was shouting that they needed help to bring glory to their magic destruction group. He convinced everyone that the time for revolution had come. Abel saw Bass. He heard from Ted that he, Bass, also goes to this school. The guy at that moment was convincing those around him that magic is bad. Abel was called out by Seagal. He was glad to have found Abel. Abel immediately recognized the guy who had spoken to him and Ted earlier. Seagal says he would like to apologize for their captain's behavior. He asks the guy to take a sports drink as a sign of peace. Abel says his eyes are fine, as he's already used to this kind of treatment. The guy thanks Seagal for the sports drink. Abel points to the strange magic eradication research group and asks who they are. Segal says these guys are from the AMO organization. He talks about how they recently became popular at the academy because they irritate many students. Abel asks what AMO is. Seagal explains that AMO is an acronym for the largest anti-magic organization in the country. Seagal says that the members of the organization are for peace and against war. But the guy thinks that they are just radicals. Segal says that this has become quite a serious social problem lately. This is the first time Abel has heard of something like this. Seagal then gets the boy's attention again and asks him if he has decided which research group he will join. He asks if he really has no interest in their group. Abel answers honestly that he hasn't decided yet. He says he's more interested in magic research groups, but the groups he sees in this place don't suit him. Seagull asks if that's true. Seagull wonders what kind of research group the boy might be suited to. Seagull suddenly remembers something and asks the boy to follow him. He assumed that he knew which group might interest Abel. Abel turns around one last time to look at Bass, and then follows Seagull. Seagull takes him to a place and says that they have arrived. The guy points his hand at a girl who is the Ice Queen named Noel. Seagull asks if Abel is interested in the girl. Seagull says that she is called the Ice Queen. Abel wonders who the girl is. Abel turned to Seagull and asked about the Ice Queen. Seagull explained that the girl had entered the academy at the same time as Abel. Seagull also explained that she was immediately put on the list for admission to the cram school. He mentioned that everyone at the school knew about her. Seagull said that despite the girl being the owner of enormous power, she was always alone and never talked to anyone. The guy added that no one had ever seen her smile. He said that this is how she got her nickname, Ice Queen. Seagull smiles and says that Abel will definitely be able to make friends with the girl. The guy says that everything is clear to him. Abel looks at the girl and thinks that she is about the same level as Eliza. He suggests that she might even be stronger. Seagull waves to the guy and tells him it's time for him to go. Abel says goodbye to him and thanks him for his help. Abel turns to the girl. Abel approaches Noel. He notices that the girl has blue eyes. He assumes that they undoubtedly played a role in her gaining the title of Ice Queen. Abel asks Noel if she can spare him some time. The girl ignores the guy. He calls the girl again, and after a few minutes, she finally answers him. Abel says that he is interested in the Ancient Magic Research Group. He convinces her that he has come to learn a little more about this research group. Noel approaches the boy and hands him a cube. She says that first he will have to solve a riddle. Abel looks at the cube and realizes that it is a magical labyrinth. It seems fragile to him. Abel knew that the magic cube was designed to assess the ability to decipher magic. The guy looked at the cube and assumed that the girl had not bought it, but had made it with her own hands. Abel solves the riddle in a few seconds and hands the cube to the girl. Noel looks at Abel in amazement. Noel thinks Abel broke the cube. The guy says he just solved it. Noel asks if the guy is lying. She said that no matter how capable a person might be, it would still take him at least an hour to solve it. Noel looks thoughtfully at the cube. Abel thinks that the girl is showing her not so good side. Abel says that in any case, a promise is a promise. He asks her to tell him about her research group. Noel looks at the guy seriously and agrees. She gets up from her seat and asks him to follow her. Abel followed Noel. He saw a sign that said regular students were not allowed in. The guy asked if they could be in that place. Noel remained silent. Then they approached the statue and the girl said that they were there. She turned around and asked the guy to wait a few seconds. The guy notices that the girl is using the keystone. Suddenly he sees how she opens a secret passage. Noel walks inside and welcomes the boy to her research group. Abel doesn't see any other students. Noel walks up to the table and says there are no other students. She explains that the only person who has ever been in this study group is herself. Abel realized that the magical labyrinth acted as an entrance exam. Abel went to the bookcase and noticed one very interesting book. He noticed that the book was about 50 years old. He had not found anything like it in the bookstores in the entire city. The guy remembers that the oldest book he found was only 100 years old. Abel turns to Noel and asks if there are any books in this place that are older than 100 years. Noel replies that there are no more books like that in this place. She tells that most of the magic books were burned during the big incident that happened 100 years ago. Abel asks what the big incident was. Noel tells of how, about 200 years ago, 4 great sages were able to overthrow the Demon King and bring peace to their land. The girl asks if Abel knows anything about this. He replies that he knows the story. Noel tells of how problems arose after this. She says that many people wanted to get the Demon King's territory, and that's why the war started. The girl adds that the war lasted for over 100 years. She also says that many more people died in this war than during the life of the Demon King. Abel finds this ironic. Noel says that since time their bodies and minds have been exhausted by this war. She says that all this lasted until a certain point. This continued until they created an anti-magic ideology. People formed the AMO group, which Abel had seen before. Noel says that this group hates magic and tries to eradicate it from their world. They were the ones who started destroying magic books all over the world. For this reason, they have almost no ancient books left. Abel says that this is quite a strange story. He asks why no one says anything about such an incident if it was of such a huge scale. Noel says that anyone can talk about this incident, but many people in power adhere to their ideology, so he considers it taboo to talk about the burning of those books. Abel understands everything. Abel thought that the reason for such a decline in magic was magical artifacts, but as it turns out, this was not the only reason. Abel thinks about the fact that even after many generations, valuable magic books are indispensable for the development of stronger magic. Abel understands that because AMO started destroying magic books all over the world, the level of magic has dropped so much. Noel says that the purpose of this research group is to try to learn as much as possible about ancient magic. Abel says, that's a pretty weird idea. Noel asks why the guy isn't laughing. Abel asks why he should laugh. Noel says he should laugh because other people always say that using magical artifacts is much more convenient. Abel understands that because the girl specializes in the study of ancient magic, people began to treat her negatively. Abel says he won't laugh. He convinces the girl that she is an incredible person. He adds that he is not interested in making fun of other people's hobbies. Noel says he doesn't like people who disdain other people's efforts. She approaches the guy and asks him to state his name. Abel says his name. The girl repeats it, embarrassed. And then she hands him the key and says that if he doesn't mind, she would like him to come to her next time. Abel looks at the key and thinks that he was just planning to see what kind of research group the girl had. But he decided to stay in this place a little longer as there were many rare books in it. He takes the key and says he doesn't mind. At this time, Eliza was sitting across from Yukari in the establishment. She felt something unpleasant. Ted lay on the desk next to Abel. He was glad that the lesson was over. Abel and Ted get up and move towards the exit. Ted waves to his teacher and says that they will see each other in the next classes. Ted says that he wants to visit one more study group. His hands are shaking at this point. Abel leaves the office and thinks about what he promised Noel to meet her after school. Eliza approaches Abel. She asks if the guy can spare some of his time. Abel asks what happened. The girl convinces him that nothing terrible happened. She just wanted to know which research group the boy had decided to join. Abel remembers that he has not yet officially joined the Ancient Magic Research Group. The guy says that he has not yet decided which research group to join. Eliza asks if the guy wants to join a research group she has her eye on. The girl hands the boy a piece of paper and asks if he would like to visit this research group with her. Abel looks at the paper carefully and realizes that it is a brochure for the Dragon Riding Research Group. The boy thinks that it has been a long time since he last rode a dragon. Abel agrees and says that he wouldn't mind keeping the girl company. Eliza's mouth drops open in surprise. She asks if the guy really agrees. Then the girl runs away and reminds Abel of what he promised. Abel looked at the girl and thought that she was as cheerful as always. Abel comes down the stairs and meets Emerson. He asks him what he is doing near a research group that was studying magic. Emerson says that it is a huge coincidence. He pretends to be very surprised by their meeting. Abel feels like Emerson has stopped following him. He assumes that the man is following Noel. Emerson tells the boy that he doesn't need to be so wary of him. He says that he is merely an advisor to a research group studying ancient magic. It is for this reason that he sometimes comes to this place. Emerson asks what the guy is doing near this research group. Abel says nothing special worth mentioning. He says he is just fulfilling a promise he made to Noel. Emerson asks if this is true. He suggests that Noel was able to interest the guy. Emerson says that such an opportunity rarely comes up, so he decides to tell the guy about the girl. Emerson explains that Noel is an ordinary student who received a personal recommendation from the principal. The man claims that she is superior in her abilities to most teachers. He also mentions that the girl is exempt from all classes because they do not meet her requirements. That's why she was sitting in the library, where rare books are collected. Abel remembers that he really didn't see the girl at any of the classes. He understands that Emerson is telling the truth. Emerson smiles and says that sometimes great talent turns people off. The man assumes that the girl needs a friend who will be her equal in abilities. Emerson chuckles, then says he doesn't know if Abel's abilities will be much greater than Noel's. Emerson asks what Abel thinks about that. He says he has a special right to excuse students from classes. Abel says that he doesn't need it, which leaves the man stunned. Abel says that his goal is a peaceful school life. He goes further and tries to enter the research group's rooms. Emerson says that Abel still doesn't understand something. He says that the moment Abel spoke to the girl, his wish for a peaceful school life became just a dream. Noel sees Abel and immediately approaches him. She says that she has been waiting for a guy for a long time. Abel thought that the girl at the moment somehow resembles a dog. Noel picks up a book and says that she wanted to show the guy something. She says that she took the book from home. Abel asks what book the girl is holding. Noel tells her it is the Akashic Records. He says that is what her family calls the book. Abel has heard of this book. He remembers that more than 100 years ago, there were many battles over this book. The boy heard that if a person can learn all the spells stored in this book, he will be able to rule the whole world. Abel thought it would be an understatement to simply call the book a disaster. Abel asks Noel why she brought such a dangerous thing. The girl said she brought it because Abel said he was looking for a book that would be older than 200 years. Abel didn't quite mean it that way. Abel thinks that the girl might be from a royal family, since she has such a valuable book. Noel blushes and asks what she did wrong. Abel reassures her that everything is fine. He asks if he can look at the book. Noel hands the boy a book. She says that she will make an exception for Abel and show him the treasures. Abel sees that the girl is using a cursed magic book that can distort history itself. He wonders what was in this book. Abel opens the book and notices that each magic formula is written in great detail. Abel won't be able to read everything since the book is burnt, so the text is damaged in some places, but the guy still notices that it is written at a high level. Abel thinks that 200 years ago only he could have written a book with such advanced magical formulas. The guy then reads to the end and notices a signature at the bottom that was intended for a man named Daytona. Abel asks if the girl inherited this book from her ancestors. The girl says she found it in her home warehouse. Noel thinks that this book was given to her ancestors by an incredible magician whom they admired. The girl asks how Abel knows about this. Everything becomes clear to Abel. He thinks that at some point something unusual really did happen. Abel remembers a girl who sat in front of him and asked if he had fulfilled her promise. The guy then replied that he had almost fulfilled it. After Abel and the heroes defeated the Demon King of Twilight, their group spent their last days fighting the remnants of his army. That day, Abel promised Daytona that he would give her the book he wrote. The girl thanked him. Abel asked the girl why she wanted the book so badly. He told her then that it was a guide for black and gray eyes, so it was useless for blue ones. The girl turned to Abel and said that she was sure that the next generation would consider him the greatest wizard. She smiled at the boy and said that she just wanted to leave a memory of the greatest magician of all time. Then Abel asked what the real reason was. The girl replied that she was actually doing all this for the money. The girl was sure that she would be able to sell the magic book written by Abel for good money. Abel then thought that the girl had not changed at all. He understood that although she was a magician, the experience of a merchant could not simply disappear. Abel remembered that the book contained magic formulas that he had found during his research into rebirth magic. In any case, Abel would have told the girl more if she wanted to read the book herself. The girl says that since the guy gave her the book, he should sign it for her. She says that this way, the value of the book will increase. Abel assumed that the girl leaves him no choice. The guy then signs the book and returns it to the girl. She looks at the signature and sees that the guy signed the book for the girl. She immediately asks why he wrote her name. The guy laughs and asks the girl to take care of it. She was embarrassed. Abel was surprised that the girl actually cared about the book and passed it on to her descendants. Then Abel thinks about how his book has been in the hands of many people, and in the end, it has even unleashed many conflicts. Abel remembers that Daytona was a woman with a strong sense of responsibility. He thought it took a lot of effort to get her back. Noel noticed Abel's thoughtful look and asked what happened. The guy answered that everything was fine. He said that he just remembered something about the past. Now when the boy looked at the book, he thought that it looked terrible. Many years had passed since he wrote it, and he had become stronger. Noel suddenly says that this can't be happening. Abel assumes that she has realized who the guy really is. Noel asked the boy if he really understood what was written in the book. Abel was the one who wrote the book, so of course he understood what was written in it. The boy thought that there was nothing surprising about it, since a magic book of that era was quite difficult to decipher since it was written using an ancient language. The boy also took into account the level of modern magic. The level was too low, so there were no magicians who could decipher the book. Abel points to the pages of the book and says that it says about reincarnation. The girl asks what that means. Abel says that this chapter talks about the connection between the human body and soul. Noel looks at the boy with admiration and says that it is incredible. She asked Abel what else was written in the book. She asked him to tell her as much as possible about. Abel apologized to the girl and said that he would answer all her questions later. He says that if he starts explaining everything to her, it will drag on until the morning. The girl understands everything. Abel sits down on a chair and asks the girl not to make such a pitiful face. He says that next time he will teach the girl to read this book. She asks if it is true. Abel confirms his own words and says that he will do it as soon as he finishes reading his books. Abel notices that Noelle is blushing and says that she is very happy. At this moment, Abel turns to Daytona and thinks about the fact that he made a not very reasonable promise to one of her heirs. Abel and Eliza attended an event for a dragon writing research group. They were not impressed by the welcome. Abel already regretted agreeing to go with Eliza to the meeting of the research group that was engaged in dragon writing. Abel looked at the members of the research group and saw that they were all dressed in coquettish costumes. He also felt a strong scent of perfume coming from them. The guy was no longer sure that they could fly on dragons. Abel recalled that 200 years ago, caring for dragons was an unimaginably difficult task, since dragons are very active and voracious. They are also quite smart, and therefore could escape if precautions are not taken. Abel thought that none of the participants were able to cope with the dragon. At that moment, Eliza apologized to Abel. She didn't know what this group would be like. One of the students wanted to ask a question. One of the leaders of the research team listened to her attentively. The girl asked what was the difference between their research team and the research team of the dragon riders. The head of the research team says, "That's a good question." He starts to explain that they have different views on what they do. The guy says that their main goal is to have as much fun as possible. He convinces that this is the reason why there is nothing complicated in their research group. He says that everyone in this place can enjoy what they want to do. They do not care whether the members of this research group can fly dragons. Abel understood why there is such a condescending attitude in this research group. Abel was still surprised by how all the participants used the dragons for entertainment purposes. He thought that compared to the previous eras, this was much more prosperous. The leader asked everyone to gather in groups of 2 with one of the elders. Abel turned around and saw that all the girls were standing near the boys and saying that they had hoped for them. Eliza was embarrassed by this. Abel sighed, thinking that the purpose of this study group was to get into a relationship. The guy's head hurt just looking at the participants. The leader turned to Eliza and said that he was very happy to have her in their study group. The guy extended his hand to her and asked if she wanted to fly on a dragon with him. Eliza points to Abel and says that she came specifically with him. She would like Abel to fly with them. The leader says that this is impossible. The boss says that his dragon can only hold 2 people. That's why Abel will have to fly on another dragon. The girl tries to resist. The manager approaches her and asks what the problem is. He asks if the girl wants to have fun flying on a dragon. Eliza looks at the boy and thinks. Abel wonders if the girl is really trying to take care of him. Abel raises his hand and says that Eliza doesn't have to worry about him. He asked her to go and have some fun. The girl did not understand why Abel reacted that way. The guy asked what was wrong. The girl looks at the guy with displeasure at first. Then she agrees and goes to the head of the research group. Abel didn't understand why the girl was so angry with him. He wondered what he had done wrong. The guy just wanted the girl not to worry about him and to have fun. The leader took the girl away and said that everything would be fine. At the end, he turned around, smiled, and asked to find a dragon for Abel. The head of the research group pointed to her dragon and said that his name was Sviatoslav. Eliza was impressed because it was the first time she saw a dragon so close. Abel thought that the guy had a nice dragon. Abel was afraid that the dragons would be in a terrible state because of the rejection of the mania, but it seems that he was wrong. The manager pointed at Abel and asked who he was. The guy introduced himself. The manager immediately asked him to choose the dragon he liked. Abel thought the boy was being very careless, but he didn't want to worry about it anymore, so he was fine with it. The leader winked at the girl and said that they could follow and begin their flight on the dragon. Eliza looked at Abel as he walked away, then she turned back to the blonde boy. Suddenly, a boy stopped Abel. He asked what Abel was doing in this place. Abel apologized and asked if he and the boy knew each other. The boy introduces himself and says his name is Pepe. He tells him that he takes care of dragons. Abel looks at the boy and thinks that he has the potential to become a dragon master. Abel noticed that the boy was very passionate about his work, that even his clothes were dirty and full of holes. The guy noticed that the place was not entirely clean, but tidy and surprisingly cozy. He concluded that Pepe was really trying. Pear smiles and says he's glad to meet you. Then he remembers something and asks if Abel wanted to ride the dragon. He says he wouldn't advise it. Abel asks why the boy does not advise him to ride the dragon. The boy rubs the back of his head and says that it would take too long to tell, so he decides to show everything. The boy leads Abel to the dragon. Abel sees a big and strong dragon. He thinks it is rare to meet such a dragon. Abel says the dragon looks good. He asks if such a dragon should not be given to the royal family. Pepe says that this dragon is not so special. He tells that this dragon is more than 100 years old. He used to be a fast and riding dragon, but after he was brought to this place, he changed. Pepe says that this dragon does not listen to anyone, is rowdy and wreaks havoc. He tells that all the students who tried to ride him were injured. The boy adds that the dragon is good to young dragons, so Pepe can't just get rid of him. If he does, all the other dragons will worry. Pepe says that dragons are much more fragile creatures. He knows that not all people understand this. It becomes clear to Abel. He knew that dragons are very proud creatures and do not respect those who are weaker than them. He believed that this dragon was still incredibly strong. Abel assumed that the dragon was simply hiding its true power so that people would not use it. The boy approached the dragon. Pepe tried to stop him. He said that it was very dangerous. The dragon opened his eyes and looked at Abel. Then he moved away and closed his eyes again. Pepe says that the dragon always behaves like this. Abel understands that the dragon really hates people. He assumes that it is all because of the students who bother him every day, but he is still convinced that the dragon has not completely lost trust in people. Abel knew that powerful dragons were very picky about who they allowed to fly on them. Abel raised his hand and cast a spell to make the dragon obey his commands. The dragon suddenly opened his eyes and growled. Abel understood that the dragon's fighting spirit was much greater than the boy had hoped for. This was approximately what he had expected from the once famous dragon. Pepe looks at the dragon with admiration. He says that the dragon is incredible and that it is the first time he has seen one like this. Abel approaches a dragon named Leo and pets him. Pepe asks who Abel is. He is amazed that the dragon approached him without any hesitation. Abel mounts the dragon and says that there is nothing special or impressive about him. He calls himself just an ordinary student. Then the guy takes off on the dragon. At this time, Eliza was flying on a dragon with the leader. She looked around and thought that the views were simply incredible. From the height of the dragon's flight, the houses seemed very small to her. The girl closes her eyes and thinks that it would be better if she flew with Abel. The manager turned around and asked what was bothering Eliza. The girl says that she doesn't feel very well and asks the guy to take a short break and rest near the rock they were flying past. The research team leader and Eliza landed near the cliff. They decided to have a snack. While the girl was sitting and drinking tea, she thought about how this place could only be reached with the help of a dragon. The manager comes up to Eliza and says that enjoying such a view is really very exciting. He asks if the girl would like a bun. Eliza agrees and reaches for the bun. She thanks the guy. Suddenly, the girl relaxes her grip and drops the bun. She asks what's going on. Eliza loses feeling in her body and falls to the ground. The guy says that he knew that the girl was weak. The guy says that the substance he added to the girl's tea worked very quickly. Eliza tries to use magic and throws a fireball at the guy. But he easily stops it with his hand. Eliza looks at the guy in amazement, and he starts laughing. He asks if the girl really thought she could hurt him with such a weak attack. Eliza again throws several fireballs towards the young man, but he easily dodges them all. The guy asks if the girl knows that the accuracy of magic without magical artifacts depends on the emotional state of a person. The boy approaches Eliza and says that she must be punished for her disobedience. At this moment, the girl asks Abel to save her. Meanwhile, Abel flies on a dragon. The guy asks who she is talking about. Then he remembers the guy with the lower eyes. The guy says that the dragon he allowed Abel to ride is perfect for him, as he is very proud and will not allow himself to be ridden. The boy assumes that the dragon has already thrown Abel off its back. He thinks that the boy is finished. Eliza can't believe it. The guy asks the girl to forget about Abel. He says that the girl should enjoy the time spent with him. He says that if the girl doesn't relax, he will continue to treat her badly. Suddenly, the boy gets kicked by the dragon. Abel's voice is heard, apologizing for being late. The boy flies away after the blow and screams. Eliza is happy to see Abel. She sees him standing on the dragon. Abel approaches the girl and asks if she is okay. Eliza says that she is glad that the guy came for her. The girl asks how the guy knew where she was. Abel tells her that he saw fireballs. Everything becomes clear to Eliza. The guy realizes that the girl is under the influence of some substance. Eliza convinces Abel that she is okay. She asks the guy to follow the head of the research group. At this time, the boy was crawling and screaming, speaking negatively about Abel. Abel asks if the guy really decided to fly to such a deserted place to attack a girl. The guy demands that Abel shut up. He again speaks negatively about Abel, saying that he does not even know how to use magic. Suddenly, the guy takes out his magic weapon and points it at Abel. He demands that the guy stop giving orders. The guy used the wind blade. Abel managed to dodge all the attacks that flew at him. Abel believed that there was nothing easier than to evade the magic of a student who was completely dependent on his artifact. Abel approached the boy and struck him. The guy's weapon fell from his hands. The guy looked at his hand and couldn't understand what had just happened. Abel knew that many modern mages had one weakness. After they lost their artifacts, they could no longer fight. The guy then suggests that the enemy's true goal was something else. Eliza calls the guy. She tries to shout at him to turn around. Right behind him, the dragon was heading towards him to attack. The leader of the research team laughed. He shouted that Abel was caught. He ordered his dragon to attack him. Abel turns around and uses magic on Sviatoslav. He used physical strengthening magic and finger strengthening magic. The boy stopped the dragon with one finger. He looked at it and said that he expected the dragon to be very strong. The leader runs up to them and shouts, asking his dragon what he is doing. He ordered him to attack Abel. Abel won the battle, so the dragon just looked at him. Then the boy ordered Sviatoslav to freeze. The dragon opened his eyes wide in great fear. Abel ordered Sviatoslav to take his master and fly away. He says that if the dragon does this, the boy will spare his life. The research team leader asked what was wrong with his dragon. The dragon turned to his master and burst into tears. The dragon ran towards his master. The boy could not understand what Sviatoslav was doing. The dragon grabbed the boy and carried him away. Abel thought it looked very funny. He went up to the girl and helped her up. She didn't look very well, so the guy decided to use restoration magic. Abel watched the dragon fly away with its owner and thought that this guy got what he deserved. Then Abel, after the girl felt better, helped her to stand up. They sat on his dragon together and took off. Eliza looked around and said that Abel's dragon was much better. It seemed to her that Leo was faster and stronger. Abel wanted the girl to enjoy the flight. He didn't want the girl to come back with only bad memories of this day. Eliza points to the sunset and asks if the boy thinks it looks beautiful. Abel turns his head and sees another dragon and Ryder also admiring the sunset. Abel and Eliza also checked the other students to see if they were in the same situation as Eliza. They saw that they were all doing well. Abel assumed that the leader of the research group was the only one who lured the girl and did something like that. At that moment, the dragon named Sviatoslav continued to fly with his master. The guy was still trying to break free and screamed that Abel would regret what he had done. Eliza blushed, and then attracted the guy's attention in order to ask him, "Wouldn't it be great if time stopped right at this moment?" Abel looks at the girl and is silent for a while. He does not understand why she asks him such questions. Eliza blushes even more and waits for the guy's answer. Abel thinks that even if the girl asked him to stop time, he would not be able to do it, since he has not mastered the magic of stopping time. Abel suggests that it is theoretically possible to stop time. He thinks he will be able to learn this in about 5 years. The girl presses herself closer to Abel. She said the guy was amazing. Abel remained silent for a while. He did not understand why the girl was behaving so strangely. Abel closed his eyes and asked the girl not to say such words that could easily make the guy misunderstand everything. Abel had long ago noticed Eliza's peculiarity, with the help of which she could mislead people. The guy opened his eyes and turned to the girl. He tells her that he wants to show one research group. At this point, Eliza realizes that the guy hasn't understood anything. She thinks he's stupid when it comes to romantic relationships.